My sister announced that she was pregnant for the fifth time and publicly volunteered my bank account to raise him. I was finally fed up with being the family ATM, so I left, but she called the police to arrest me for child abandonment to force me back. What she did not know was that the police were coming for her, not me. I am Zora, 35 years old, and for the last decade I have been the silent engine keeping my family afloat. As a lead clinical pharmacist in Atlanta, I spent 12-hour shifts on my feet, double-checking interactions and saving lives, only to come home to a family that was slowly draining the life out of me. Last Saturday, the humidity was thick enough to chew on, but the tension in my backyard was even thicker. My older sister Tanisha had invited 50 people to my home for her gender reveal party. She did not ask. She just told me to make sure the landscaping was done and the fridge was stocked. I stood on the edge of my patio holding a glass of iced tea that was sweating almost as much as I was watching Tanisha hold court in the center of the yard I paid the mortgage on. She looked radiant, I will give her that, with her hand resting on her baby bump, surrounded by balloons that cost more than her husband Kyle's contribution to their household in the last 5 years. Before I tell you how a simple confetti cannon ignited a war that would end in handcuffs, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the responsible sibling who was treated like the villain for finally saying no. Your support helps me share the truth about how toxic loyalty can destroy you if you let it. The music was blasting a bass-heavy track that rattled the windows of my colonial-style home. I watched my brother-in-law Kyle stumble near the buffet table. He was already 3 beers deep, drinking the craft I had bought for myself for special occasions, not the cheap light beer I had explicitly purchased for the party. Kyle is 36, white, and perpetually unemployed, though he calls himself a crypto investor. He fits into my family dynamics like a jagged puzzle piece, leveraging his lack of ambition against Tanisha's entitlement. He spotted me and raised my expensive beer in a mock salute, smirking. His 4 children, my nieces and nephews, were running wild near the pool. Their clothes were stained and ill-fitting, a stark contrast to Tanisha's brand-new maternity designer dress. My heart ached for them. 7-year-old Marcus was trying to stop the 2-year-old from eating dirt, while Tanisha and Kyle were too busy posing for Instagram photos to notice. "All right, everyone, gather round," Tanisha shouted into a microphone that was screeching with feedback. "It is time for the big reveal." The crowd cheered. My mother, Mama Hattie, was front and center, clapping her hands and praising Jesus. She looked at Tanisha with an adoration she never directed at me, despite the fact that I paid for her glaucoma medication and the roof over her head. To Mama Hattie, Tanisha was the golden child because she gave her grandbabies. I was just Zora, the unmarried workaholic with no legacy. Kyle grabbed the confetti cannon, a large blue cylinder that looked more like a weapon than a party favor. He was swaying slightly. "Careful with that, Kyle," I called out, stepping off the patio. "Point it up away from the garden." He rolled his eyes, a gesture I had seen 1,000 times. "Relax, Zora. You are always so uptight. It is just paper." He did not point it up. In his clumsy, inebriated excitement to be the center of attention, he aimed the cannon horizontally directly toward the trellis of Juliet roses I had spent 3 years cultivating. These were not just flowers to me. They were my therapy. They were the one thing I nurtured that did not ask for money or make me feel guilty. They cost me $2,000 and countless hours of care. 3, 2, 1, the crowd chanted. Boom! A cloud of blue smoke exploded, followed instantly by a sizzling sound. It wasn't just confetti. It was a pyrotechnic smoke bomb, and a spark landed directly in the dry mulch and the delicate paper-thin petals of my prize-winning roses. Within seconds, orange flames licked up the trellis. "My roses," I screamed, dropping my tea. The glass shattered on the pavers. I ran toward the garden hose, shoving past cheering guests who were too mesmerized by the blue smoke to realize something was burning. I scrambled to turn the spigot, my hands shaking. "It is a boy," Kyle yelled, pumping his fist in the air, completely ignoring the fire he had just started. I sprayed the water frantically, dousing the flames, but it was too late. The heat had scorched the main canes. The blooms were black, shriveled skeletons. The smoke cleared, revealing the charred remains of my sanctuary. I stood there, water dripping from the hose, my expensive silk blouse ruined by soot and mud. My garden. I whispered, my voice trembling with a rage I had suppressed for years. "You burned my garden." Mama Hattie walked over, waving her hand dismissively at the blackened mess. "Oh, stop being dramatic, Zora. It is just some bushes. Look at the blessing. You are getting a nephew, a grandson to carry on the family name." She reached out to hug Kyle, patting him on the back. "Good job, son. A boy. Praise God." I stared at them. A boy. That was all that mattered. Not my property, not my hard work, not the fact that I had asked him to be careful. "You idiot," I hissed, looking at Kyle. "I told you to point it up. Do you know how much these cost?" Tanisha waddled over the microphone, still in her hand. "Zora, seriously, you are going to ruin my moment over some flowers. You can buy more. You have plenty of money. Don't be selfish." Selfish. The word hung in the humid air. I looked at my sister. She was glowing, healthy, and fed, standing in the house I owned, eating food I bought, wearing a dress I likely paid for indirectly through the loans I gave her that she never paid back. And I was the selfish one. I turned off the hose. The silence in the yard was heavy. The guests were watching, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Most of them were church folks, people who loved gossip more than gospel. They were eating this up. Tanisha, sensing she was losing the crowd's adoration, decided to regain control the only way she knew how. By spending my money. She laughed, a high-pitched fake sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, ignore her, y'all. Auntie Zora is just emotional because she is so happy. Actually, I have another announcement." She gestured for Kyle to stand next to her. He smirked at me, wiping soot off his hands onto his jeans. "Since Zora has been so blessed in her career, and since she knows how hard it is for Kyle and me right now with the economy, she has generously offered a special gift for her new nephew." My stomach dropped. I had offered nothing. I had not even offered to host this party. She had simply announced it was happening here. Tanisha continued, beaming at the crowd. "Zora has agreed to cover the full cost of the VIP birthing suite at St. Mary's, and she is setting up a college fund starting today. She wants to make sure this little prince has the best start in life since she doesn't have children of her own to spend it on. Isn't that right, Zora? Let's hear it for the best auntie in the world." The crowd erupted in applause. Mama Hattie was nodding vigorously, shouting, "Amen, that is what family does." I stood frozen. The VIP suite at St. Mary's was $15,000 out of pocket. A college fund. She was talking about tens of thousands more. She had just publicly committed me to spending a year's worth of mortgage payments without even a conversation. She was banking on my shame. She knew I hated public scenes. She knew I would usually just smile, grit my teeth, and write the check later to avoid making Mama Hattie cry. She looked at me, her eyes daring me to contradict her. Kyle was grinning like he had won the lottery. That was the moment. That was the snap. It wasn't a loud noise in my head. It was a quiet, cold clarity. I looked at the charred remains of my roses. I looked at my nieces and nephews who were currently eating cake with their bare hands because no one was watching them. I looked at my sister, who saw me not as a person but as a resource, an unending well of cash and labor. I walked up the steps to the patio. Tanisha tried to hug me, probably expecting me to take the mic and play along. I snatched the microphone from her hand. The feedback squealed again, silencing the applause. "No," I said. My voice was calm, amplified across the silent yard. Tanisha's smile faltered. What I turned to the crowd. I turned to the 50 strangers drinking my liquor and eating my catered food. I said no. I did not agree to that. I am not paying for a VIP suite. I am not paying for a college fund. In fact, I am not paying for anything ever again. Mama Hattie stepped forward, her face twisting in anger. Zora, don't you dare embarrass your sister in front of the pastor. You fix this right now. I looked at my mother. The woman who told me to be the bigger person when Tanisha stole my lunch money in high school. The woman who told me to pray about it when Kyle borrowed my car and crashed it. No, Mama. I am done fixing it. I turned back to Tanisha. You have 5 children. You and your husband need to figure out how to pay for them. If you can't afford a VIP suite, you go to the general ward like everyone else. If you can't afford a college fund, maybe Kyle should stop playing video games and get a job. The crowd gasped. Someone dropped a fork. How dare you? Tanisha shrieked, her face turning a blotchy red. You are jealous. You are a bitter, lonely woman who hates that I have a family and you have nothing but a career and some dead flowers. Maybe I said, feeling lighter than I had in years. But at least I can pay my own bills. Now this party is over. What Kyle stepped up, trying to look menacing, though he swayed on his feet. You can't kick us out. We haven't even cut the cake. It is my house, Kyle. My name is on the deed. My name is on the mortgage. The only thing you own here is the carbon dioxide you are wasting. Get out. All of you. Now. I pointed to the gate. The guests didn't need to be told twice. The awkwardness was suffocating. People started grabbing their purses and shuffling toward the exit, whispering furiously. Mama Hattie grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. If you do this, Zora, if you humiliate us like this, God will punish you. You are turning your back on your blood. Then let God punish me, I said, pulling my arm away. But my bank is closed. Tanisha was sobbing now, loud, theatrical, heaving sobs. She clutched her belly. My baby. You are stressing the baby. If anything happens to him, it is your fault. Get off my property, Tanisha. Take your husband, take your kids, and go. I walked into the house and locked the sliding glass door behind me. I could see them through the glass. Tanisha was screaming at the closed door. Kyle was flipping me off. Mama Hattie was holding her chest like she was having a heart attack, though I knew her vitals were perfect because I checked them myself yesterday. I leaned against the cool granite of my kitchen island, my heart pounding in my chest. I thought it was over. I thought the worst was past. I pulled out my phone to check my notifications and froze. A transaction alert from my bank. $5,000. Authorization, PlayStation Network, and Neiman Marcus Kids. Time: 10 a.m. today. I felt the blood drain from my face. I opened my wallet. My emergency credit card, the one I kept in the back of my wallet for dire situations. The one I had foolishly given Mama Hattie access to last month to pick up her prescriptions, was gone. They didn't just burn my roses. They had stolen from me before they even arrived. I looked out the window. They were still there, lingering in the driveway, loading up the car, but moving slowly, expecting me to come out and apologize. Expecting me to cave like I always did. Not this time. I picked up my phone and dialed the utility company. Yes, I would like to suspend service at my guest house, immediately. Yes, I know there are people staying there. They are trespassers. Cut it. Then I opened my banking app and froze my cards. All of them. I went to the front door, ready to make sure they were actually leaving. But when I opened it, the driveway was empty. Tanisha's minivan was gone. Kyle's rusted sedan was gone. But on the front porch, sitting on the concrete steps like discarded luggage, were my 4 nieces and nephews. Marcus, the 7-year-old, looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. He was holding the 2-year-old's hand. Mommy said you have to watch us, he whispered, holding out a crumpled piece of paper. She said she is too stressed and she needs a vacation. I took the note. It was written in Tanisha's loopy handwriting on a napkin. Since you want to act like you run everything, you can run this. I need a break before the baby comes. Don't call me. We are going to the mountains. Fix your attitude before we come back. I looked at the kids. They were dirty, tired, and abandoned. My rage, which had been a hot fire, turned into something colder, something dangerous. She used her children as pawns. She thought she could force me to submit by dumping her responsibilities on my doorstep. I ushered the kids inside, gave them juice boxes, and turned on the TV. Then I picked up my phone to call Child Protective Services. But before I could dial, blue and red lights flashed through my living room window. A siren chirped. I opened the door to see two police cruisers blocking my driveway. A white officer stepped out, hand resting near his holster, looking tense. "Zora Williams," he barked. "Yes, put your hands where I can see them." "We received a 911 call from a distressed mother claiming you are holding her children hostage and threatened her life." My mouth fell open. Across the street, parked safely down the block, I saw Tanisha's minivan. She was watching. She hadn't just left them. She had swatted me. "Officer, that is a lie," I said, my voice steady despite the fear rising in my throat. "Turn around and place your hands on the wall, now." As I felt the cold metal of the handcuffs click around my wrists, I looked toward the minivan. I could see Tanisha's silhouette. She thought she had won. She thought this would break me. But she forgot one thing. I installed a Ring doorbell camera 3 days ago, and it recorded everything. The silence that descended on the living room was heavier than the humid Atlanta air outside. The last guest, Mrs. Jenkins from the church choir, had scurried out the front door clutching her purse, her eyes wide with the thrill of the gossip she was about to spread. I could almost hear the text messages flying across the neighborhood group chats, but inside the air was stagnant. The air conditioner hummed, battling the heat, but nothing could cool the temperature in the room. My sister Tanisha had flopped onto my white Italian leather sofa, keeping her muddy shoes on, rubbing her stomach as if she were protecting the heir to a throne from an assassin. Mama Hattie was pacing the floorboards, muttering prayers that sounded suspiciously like curses directed at me. And then there was Kyle. Kyle was the worst of them all. He was leaning against the mantel of my fireplace, swirling the last dregs of my expensive bourbon in a crystal glass, looking at me with a mix of pity and disappointment that made my skin crawl. He took a slow sip, savoring the liquor he could never afford to buy himself, and shook his head. "Zora, you really disappointed me today," Kyle said, his voice dripping with a condescending calmness that was meant to sound intellectual. "I thought you understood what it means to be part of this family. You know, in the Black community, we take care of our own. It takes a village, right? You have all this space, all these resources, and you are hoarding them, like some capitalist Scrooge, while your sister is bringing new life into the world. It is not a good look, Zora. It is really not." I stared at him, feeling a vein throb in my temple. Here was a 36-year-old white man who had not held a W-2 job in 4 years, standing in my living room, drinking my liquor and lecturing me on Black cultural dynamics. The audacity was breathtaking. He wore his proximity to my family like a shield, using our traditions of communal support to mask his own laziness. He loved to quote African proverbs when it was time to pay a bill, but he was nowhere to be found when it was time to do the work. "It takes a village, Kyle." I asked, my voice low and dangerous. "Is that what you call this? Because from where I am standing, a village implies everyone contributes. A village implies mutual respect. You are not a villager, Kyle. You are a pillager. You come in here, you eat my food, you break my property, and you lecture me on community while you have not contributed a dime to this family since Obama was in office. You talk about the struggle, but the only struggle you know is deciding which video game to play while my sister applies for food stamps." Kyle chuckled, dismissing my anger with a wave of his hand. "See, this is what I mean. You are so focused on money. You have let your success harden you, Zora. You have lost touch with your roots. Tanisha needs support, not judgment. We are just asking you to share your blessings." "Share my blessings." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I walked over to the kitchen island where my purse lay. I had been meaning to check something since the notification pinged on my phone outside, but the fire in the garden had distracted me. Now, with the adrenaline fading into cold clarity, I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. I scrolled to the credit card account. The Platinum card. The one with the $20,000 limit that I had foolishly added Mama Hattie to as an authorized user 3 years ago. I had given it to her strictly for her glaucoma medication and emergency groceries because her pension was small and I wanted her to have dignity. I wanted her to feel safe. But safety was not what I was looking at on the screen. Neiman Marcus, $2,500. Best Buy, $800. GameStop, $500. Ticketmaster, $1,200. The transactions were all from this morning. While I was at the grocery store buying food for their party, they were out shopping with my money. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I walked back into the living room holding the phone up. "Mama?" I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I gave you that card for medicine. Since when is a PlayStation 5 a medical necessity? Since when are Gucci baby booties an emergency?" "Mama?" Hattie stopped pacing. She looked at the phone, then at me. Her chin raised in defiance. She did not look ashamed. She looked entitled. "Your sister needed things for the baby Zora. And Kyle needed something to help him relax. He has been under so much stress lately looking for work. You have so much money sitting in the bank doing nothing. What is $5,000 to you? You make that in a week. Do not be stingy with your own blood." Stress. I turned to Kyle. "You needed a PlayStation 5 for stress?" Kyle shrugged, not even looking up from his drink. "Gaming helps me focus. It is part of my process. I am developing a streaming career, Zora. You wouldn't understand the digital economy. It is an investment. An investment." He stole my money to play games, and my mother drove the getaway car. I reached into my purse and pulled out the physical credit card I kept for myself. Then I walked over to Mama Hattie. "Give me the card, Mama." She clutched her purse to her chest. "No, you are acting crazy. I am your mother. You do not talk to me like this. Give me the card, or I report it stolen right now. And since the transactions were made in person, the police will pull the security footage. Do you want to explain to the sheriff why you signed for a gaming console with a card that isn't yours?" Mama Hattie's eyes widened. She knew I worked with the law. She knew I didn't make idle threats. Slowly, with shaking hands and a look of pure hatred, she fished the card out of her wallet and threw it on the floor. I picked it up. I held both cards in my hand. Then I walked over to the heavy marble coaster on the coffee table. I took a pair of scissors from the drawer in the side table, the ones I kept for cutting loose threads, and I cut. Snap, snap, snap. The sound was sharp and final. Plastic shards fell onto the expensive rug. "There," I said, dropping the scissors. "The bank is closed. Permanently." Tanisha sat up on the couch. Her eyes were wide, staring at the pieces of plastic like they were parts of a body. You cut it," she stammered. "But we have orders pending. We have a crib on hold. We need that money." "You need a job, Tanisha," I yelled, finally losing my composure. "You are 38 years old. You have 4 children and another on the way, and you are stealing from your little sister to buy designer clothes for a baby that doesn't even have a bed to sleep in." Tanisha's face crumpled. But then a shift happened. I saw it in her eyes. She realized pleading wouldn't work. She realized shame wouldn't work. So she went for the nuclear option. She let out a wail that shattered the tension, a high-pitched, animalistic sound. She doubled over, clutching her side, rocking back and forth. "Ow, oh my God. My stomach. My baby mama." Hattie rushed to her side, falling to her knees. "Tanisha. What is it? Breathe. Baby, breathe. It hurts!" Tanisha screamed, squeezing her eyes shut. "The stress. Zora is killing him. She is stressing me out, and I am losing the baby." Mama Hattie whipped her head around to glare at me, her eyes filled with venom. "See what you did? Are you happy now? You are going to cause a miscarriage with your selfishness? You care more about your money than your nephew's life. Get her some water. Call an ambulance. I stood there motionless. My heart rate didn't spike. My hands didn't shake. I am a clinical pharmacist. I spent 6 years in school and 10 years in hospitals. I know what distress looks like. I know what pain looks like. I know the difference between a contraction and a performance. Tanisha was not sweating. Her skin was not clammy. Her breathing was rhythmic until she remembered to gasp. And most tellingly, she was peeking out of one eye to see if I was reacting. She was faking it. Just like she faked a migraine when she didn't want to help clean up after Thanksgiving dinner. Just like she faked a twisted ankle when our father got sick so she wouldn't have to drive him to chemotherapy. I am not calling an ambulance, I said, my voice flat. And I am not getting water. If she is in labor, Kyle can drive her to the hospital. He is sober enough to drive, isn't he? Or did the stress of unemployment force him to drink too much of my bourbon? Kyle pushed off the mantle, his face red. You are a monster, Zora. She is in pain. Then take her to the ER. I challenged. Go ahead, load her up. Tanisha stopped screaming for a second, realizing her bluff was being called. She groaned, leaning back against the cushions. I just need to rest. I need to stay here. I can't move. No, I said. You are not staying here. You are not sleeping in my guest room. You are not eating my food. I looked at my watch. I am going upstairs to take a shower and wash the soot off my skin. I am changing the Wi-Fi password in 5 minutes. If you are still here in 10, I am calling the sheriff. And this time it won't be for a noise complaint. It will be for trespassing and credit card fraud. I turned my back on them. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Every instinct in my body, trained by decades of guilt and manipulation, screamed at me to turn around, to apologize, to fix it. But I forced my feet to move toward the stairs. As I climbed the steps, leaving the chaos of the living room behind, Tanisha's voice followed me, stripping away the fake pain and replacing it with pure malice. You will regret this, Zora, she screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. You think you are better than us. You think you can just throw us away. You will pay for this. Do not think you can treat a pregnant woman like trash and get away with it. I didn't answer. I walked into my bedroom, closed the heavy oak door, and locked it. I leaned against the wood, sliding down until I hit the floor. I didn't cry. I was past crying. I took out my phone and opened the router settings. Wi-Fi password changed. Downstairs, I heard a muffled shout from Kyle as his phone likely lost connection. Then the sound of heavy footsteps slamming doors and a car engine revving aggressively in the driveway. They were leaving. But as I sat there in the silence, listening to the hum of the house, I knew it wasn't over. Tanisha never retreated unless she was planning an ambush. I had cut off the money, but I hadn't cut off the toxicity. And I had a sinking feeling that the war had just begun. I just didn't know that the next battle wouldn't be fought in my living room, but in the back of a police cruiser. The morning sun filtered through my blinds, casting long, sharp shadows across my bedroom floor, but the light brought no warmth. My head was pounding a dull, rhythmic throb that reminded me of the chaos from the day before. I had barely slept, tossing and turning as I replayed the image of my burning rose garden and the sound of my sister Tanisha accusing me of trying to kill her unborn baby. I sat up, rubbing my temples, and checked my phone. It was 7 in the morning. I had a shift at the hospital starting in 2 hours. As a clinical pharmacist, I could not afford to be distracted. People's lives depended on my precision, on my ability to catch the mistakes doctors made when they were too tired or too arrogant to double-check a dosage. I needed to shake off the toxicity of my family and focus. I showered, letting the hot water scrub away the lingering feeling of soot and betrayal. I dressed in my scrubs, the crisp blue fabric usually acting as a suit of armor against the world, and went downstairs to make coffee. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I expected to feel relief that Tanisha and Kyle were gone, but instead, a heavy sense of dread hung in the air. I grabbed my travel mug and my keys, ready to walk out the door and leave this nightmare behind for a 12-hour shift. I unlocked the front door and pushed it open, stepping out onto the porch. My foot hit something soft. I looked down and the travel mug slipped from my fingers, clattering onto the concrete and splashing hot coffee across my white sneakers. There, sitting on my welcome mat like discarded packages, were my 4 nieces and nephews. Marcus, the 8-year-old, was sitting with his back against the brick wall, staring blankly at the driveway. Jaden, who was 5, was curled up in a fetal position on the hard concrete, shivering in a thin t-shirt. 3-year-old Aaliyah was picking at a hole in her leggings, her face streaked with dried tears. And in the center of them all, strapped into a car seat that looked too small for him, was 1-year-old Tyrell. The baby was asleep, his head lolling forward at an uncomfortable angle, a bottle of curdled milk resting on his chest. For a moment, my brain simply refused to process what I was seeing. It was impossible. Tanisha and Kyle had driven away last night. I had heard the car. I had seen the taillights. Marcus looked up at me. His eyes were old. They were the eyes of a child who had seen too much and expected too little. "Hi, Auntie Zora," he whispered, his voice raspy. My heart shattered. I dropped to my knees, ignoring the coffee puddle soaking into my scrubs. "Marcus," I gasped, reaching out to touch his cold cheek. "How long have you been here? Where are your parents?" He shrugged, a small, defeated movement. "Mom said we had to wait for you to come out. She said you would be mad if we knocked, because you need your beauty sleep. We have been here since the sun came up." I looked at the driveway. It was empty. I looked at the street. Empty. Panic began to rise in my chest, a cold, suffocating tide. They had dropped them off. They had driven back in the middle of the night or early morning, dumped 4 children on a porch in a neighborhood where coyotes sometimes roamed and left. Then I saw it. A piece of yellow legal pad paper taped to the handle of Tyrell's car seat. I snatched it up, my hands shaking so hard the paper rattled. "Zora," the note read in Tanisha's chaotic, looping handwriting. "Kyle and I need a mental health break. The stress you caused yesterday almost killed me. We are going to the mountains for a week to heal. Since you think you know so much about responsibility, you watch them. Consider it payment for the emotional damage you caused. Do not call us. I blocked your number, and Kyle threw his SIM card away so we can have peace. If you call the police, I will tell everyone you begged to keep them. Love, Tanisha." I stared at the paper. The words swam before my eyes. Mental health break. Payment. This wasn't just irresponsibility. This was abandonment. This was criminal. I stood up, adrenaline flooding my system. I ushered the kids inside, my movements frantic. "Come on. Get inside. Hurry." As they shuffled into the foyer, the smell hit me. It was the scent of neglect. Stale urine, unwashed hair, and old milk. Tyrell woke up as I lifted his car seat and immediately started wailing, a hungry, desperate sound that grated against my nerves. I set him down on the living room rug and started unbuckling him. His diaper was heavy, sodden with hours of waste. I ran to the kitchen, grabbing juice boxes and a box of cereal. I poured dry Cheerios into bowls because I didn't have milk. "Eat," I told the older ones. "Just eat." I paced the kitchen, clutching my phone. My mind was racing. I could not keep them. I had a job. I had a life. And more importantly, if I kept them now, Tanisha would do this forever. She would use me as a free daycare, holding her children hostage to my guilt. No, not this time. I dialed the number for Child Protective Services. My finger hovered over the call button. I knew what this meant. I knew that once I made this call, there was no going back. It meant foster care. It meant court dates. It meant destroying the family completely. But looking at Marcus, who was shoving handfuls of dry cereal into his mouth like he hadn't eaten in days, I knew I had no choice. I was not saving them by enabling their parents. I was only prolonging their suffering. I pressed call. But before the line could even ring, a sound cut through the morning silence. Sirens. Loud, piercing, and close. I frowned, lowering the phone. Maybe a neighbor had seen the kids on the porch and called. Maybe someone had reported the abandonment. I walked to the front window. A police cruiser screeched into my driveway, tires smoking as it halted inches from my garage door. Then another one pulled up on the lawn, tearing up the grass. And another. 3 police cars. Blue lights flashed frantically, reflecting off my living room walls, disorienting me. What in the world? I whispered. I opened the front door, stepping out onto the porch with my hands raised in a gesture of confusion. Officers, I am so glad you are here. I was just about to call regarding my sister leaving her. Get down! A voice roared. I froze. A police officer, a tall white man with a buzz cut and sunglasses, had exited the lead vehicle. He was crouching behind his open door, his service weapon drawn and pointed directly at my chest. I said, "Get on the ground. Now hands where I can see them." My breath hitched. Time seemed to slow down. I looked at the gun. I looked at the officer's face, tight with tension and aggression. I looked at the other officers flanking him, their hands on their holsters. "Officer, please." I stammered, my voice sounding small and terrified. "I am the homeowner. I am Dr. Zora Williams. There are children inside. We know there are children inside," the officer shouted, inching forward. "That is why you need to get on the ground right now. We have a report of an active hostage situation." Hostage situation! The words hit me like a physical blow. My mind scrambled to make sense of it. Who was a hostage? The kids. Me, officer. You have the wrong information. I pleaded slowly, lowering to my knees on the cold concrete of the porch, terrified that any sudden movement would end my life. My sister abandoned her children here. I just found them. Liar. The officer rushed up the steps, covering the distance in seconds. He didn't ask questions. He didn't ask for ID. He grabbed my wrist, twisting it behind my back with agonizing force. I cried out as my shoulder popped. He shoved me forward, slamming my face against the rough brick siding of my own house. The pain was sharp and immediate, scraping my cheek. "You have the right to remain silent," he barked into my ear, his knee pressing into my lower back. "Officer, please listen," I gasped, my face pressed against the brick. "My sister is Tanisha. She left a note. It is in the kitchen. We got a call from the mother, ma'am." Another officer yelled, moving past us to kick open my front door. "She says you snatched these kids from her car while she was unloading groceries. She says you texted her threatening to kill them if she didn't give you $5,000. The world tilted on its axis. She had swatted me. Tanisha hadn't just left. She had orchestrated a scenario where I would be the villain and potentially a dead one. She knew that calling the police on a black woman in an upscale neighborhood with a report of a hostage situation was a death sentence. She weaponized the police against her own sister. I watched helplessly as the officers stormed my house. I heard Marcus scream. I heard Aaliyah crying for her mommy. "Don't hurt them," I screamed, struggling against the handcuffs that were now biting into my wrists. "They are scared. They don't know you." "Stop resisting," the officer holding me yelled, tightening his grip. "You are under arrest for kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and terroristic threats." He yanked me up from the ground, spinning me around. I was barefoot, my scrubs dirty, my hair wild. I looked crazy. I looked exactly like the criminal they thought I was. I looked toward the street, and there, parked 3 houses down, barely visible behind a large oak tree, was the silver bumper of Tanisha's minivan. She was watching. She was waiting for me to be dragged away so she could swoop in, play the victim, collect her kids, and probably sue me for trauma. Tears of rage and helplessness pricked my eyes. I was a doctor. I was a pillar of the community. And in seconds, a lie had reduced me to a suspect. The officer shoved me toward the cruiser. I stumbled, trying to catch my footing. "Wait," I said, my voice shaking but gaining strength. "Check the note. Check the ring camera." The officer ignored me, pushing my head down to force me into the back seat. "We will check everything at the station. Right now, you are going to jail." As the heavy door slammed shut, sealing me in the claustrophobic cage of the police car, I watched through the window. I saw an officer carrying Tyrell out. The baby was screaming. I saw Marcus walking out with his hands up, terrified, mimicking what he had seen on TV. My heart broke for them. But as the fear subsided, a cold, hard resolve took its place. Tanisha thought she had won. She thought this was the checkmate. She thought getting me arrested would force me to pay to beg to submit. But she had made a fatal error. She had brought the law into my house. She had invited scrutiny. And she had forgotten that my house was smart. The officer started the engine. I leaned my head against the plexiglass divider, watching the house I had worked so hard for disappear as we pulled away. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "You made a mistake, Tanisha," I whispered to the empty air. "You didn't just call the police on me. You called them on yourself. You just don't know it yet." The back of the police cruiser smelled of stale sweat and industrial disinfectant, a sensory assault that made my stomach churn. I sat pressed against the hard plastic seat, my wrists aching from the metal cuffs, watching the officer in the front seat holding my phone. I had given him the passcode with a calm I did not feel, knowing that the digital footprint of my home security system was the only thing standing between me and a felony charge. Through the plexiglass divider, I watched his expression shift. The aggressive adrenaline-fueled tension in his jaw went slack. He swiped across the screen, likely rewinding the footage, watching it again. He was seeing exactly what I knew was there. Tanisha pulling up, Tanisha dragging the kids out like sacks of laundry, Tanisha taping the note. And most importantly, the audio of her laughing as she got back into the car, saying she hoped I would panic. The officer opened the back door. The blast of humid Atlanta heat hit me instantly. He did not apologize. He simply unlocked the handcuffs. "You are free to go, Dr. Williams," he muttered, holstering his key. It appears there was a miscommunication. I rubbed my wrists, feeling the indentations left by the metal. "Miscommunication, officer. You just watched a woman abandon 4 minors on a porch and then file a false police report claiming a hostage situation. That is not a miscommunication. That is a crime. I want her arrested. I want you to put out an APB for that minivan right now." The officer sighed, taking off his sunglasses to rub the bridge of his nose. He looked annoyed, not at the crime, but at the paperwork involved. "Look, ma'am, I saw the video. She didn't abandon them. She left them with family. You are her sister. You are the aunt. In the eyes of the law, she left them in a safe environment." Safe environment. I stepped closer, my voice rising. "I did not consent to this. She dumped them. And the false report?" She swatted me. He held up a hand. "She claimed she was distressed. Postpartum hormones, stress, whatever. If we pursue this, it becomes a," he said, she said, "domestic dispute. It is a civil matter. We are not going to waste resources chasing down a pregnant mother because you two do not get along. You have the kids. They are safe. Just work it out when she gets back." I stared at him, dumbfounded. The system I worked alongside every day, the system I trusted, was shrugging its shoulders. "So what am I supposed to do?" I asked, gesturing to the 4 terrified children watching us from the living room window. "I have a job. I have a life. I cannot take care of 4 children. Take them. Call Child Protective Services. Put them in the system." The officer shook his head, his face hardening. "We are not calling CPS. The state is overwhelmed as it is. We prioritize children who have no place to go. These kids have a wealthy aunt with a big house. If you want to surrender them to the state, you can go down to the family court on Monday and file the paperwork yourself. But until then, they are your responsibility. Do not leave them unattended, or we will be back, and next time, the charges for neglect will stick to you." He got back in his car. The other cruisers followed suit. I stood alone in my driveway, watching the convoy leave, feeling a level of helplessness I had never experienced in my life. Tanisha had known. She knew the police wouldn't arrest a pregnant black woman for leaving her kids with her rich sister. She had weaponized the incompetence of the system just as effectively as she weaponized her own children. I walked back inside. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing me in with the chaos. The living room was already a disaster zone. In the 30 minutes I had been outside, the kids had unleashed a tornado of anxiety and destruction. Throw pillows were scattered. A vase was knocked over, thankfully not broken, but water soaked my rug. I looked at them, really looked at them. "I am hungry," Marcus said. He was standing on my sofa, jumping up and down in dirty sneakers. "I need to go to work," I whispered to myself. I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking as I dialed the hospital. Calling in sick was something I never did. In 10 years, I had missed 3 days. "This is Dr. Williams," I said when the supervisor answered. "I have a family emergency, a severe one. I cannot come in." "Zora, we have a full slate today," the supervisor said, her voice tight. "We are already short-staffed. Can you come in for a half shift?" "No," I said, looking at Tyrell, the baby who was gnawing on the corner of my coffee table. "I cannot come in at all. I do not know when I can come back. I will let you know." I hung up before she could argue. I had just put my career, the one thing that gave me identity and purpose, on hold for the people who were actively trying to destroy it. For the next 6 hours, my immaculate home turned into a prison. I tried to institute order. I tried to be the aunt I wanted to be. But the reality of Tanisha's parenting, or lack thereof, slapped me in the face at every turn. Lunch was the first battle. I made turkey sandwiches on whole wheat bread with apple slices. Healthy. Simple. When I put the plates down, 5-year-old Jaden looked at the sandwich like it was poison. "Where are the nuggets?" he demanded. "We do not have nuggets," I said. "We have turkey." "I want nuggets," he screamed, swiping the plate off the table. The sandwich hit the floor. Aaliyah started crying because Jaden was screaming. Marcus just laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that didn't belong in a child's throat. "Mom always gets us McDonald's," Marcus sneered. "You are rich. Why do you have trash food?" I took a deep breath. "Pick it up, Jaden. Now." He refused. I bent down to clean it up, and that is when I got close enough to see Aaliyah's face as she cried. Her mouth was open. I froze. "Open your mouth, baby," I said gently, reaching out to tilt her chin up. She pulled away, but I had seen enough. I grabbed Marcus, who was trying to sneak a soda from the fridge. "Come here, let me see your teeth." "Get off me," he yelled, trying to bite my hand. I managed to get a look. What I saw made my pharmacist's heart stop. Their teeth were rotting, not just a cavity here or there. Their gum lines were inflamed red and angry. Their molars were capped with black decay. This was bottle rot, advanced and untreated. It was the result of putting soda in baby bottles of a diet consisting entirely of sugar and acid, and a complete lack of dental hygiene. "Does your mouth hurt?" I asked Marcus, letting him go. "Only when I drink cold stuff," he muttered, grabbing a bag of chips I hadn't realized he had found in the pantry. I felt sick. This wasn't just poverty, Medicaid-covered dental for children. This was pure laziness. Tanisha couldn't be bothered to drive them to the dentist. She couldn't be bothered to make them brush. She was letting their bodies rot while she spent my money on designer shoes. I decided then and there that if I was trapped with them, I was going to fix what I could. "We are going to read," I announced later that afternoon, trying to salvage the day. I went to my study and pulled out some old children's books I kept for guests. Classics. Dr. Seuss, The Very Hungry Caterpillar. I gathered them in the living room. Tyrell had finally passed out for a nap, his diaper rash treated with the cream I kept in my first aid kit. The poor baby had screamed when I touched him. His skin was raw. "Marcus, why don't you read to us?" I handed him a book. It was a second-grade level book. Simple sentences, big pictures. Marcus stared at the book. He held it awkwardly, his hands rough and dirty. He looked at the cover, then at me. His bravado faded, replaced by a defensive scowl. "This is stupid," he said, throwing the book on the floor. "Reading is for punks." "It is not stupid, Marcus. Just read the first page." "I don't want to." It hit me then. The way he squinted. The way he got angry to mask his fear. "Marcus, I asked softly. Can you read? He jumped up, his face flushing dark. Shut up, I can read, I just don't want to read your baby books. He ran out of the room, slamming the door to the guest bathroom. I picked up the book. My hand was trembling. He was 8 years old. He should be halfway through elementary school. He should be reading chapter books. I looked at Jaden. Jaden, do you go to school? Jaden was busy trying to pull the keys off my laptop keyboard. Sometimes he said absent-mindedly, When Mom wakes up early, when Mom wakes up early, a cold dread settled in my stomach. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, leaving the kids with the TV. I needed to know. I needed to know how deep this hole was. I searched my memory for the name of the elementary school in Tanisha's district. Oak Creek Elementary. I found the number and dialed. Oak Creek Elementary front office, a woman answered. Hi, this is Dr. Zora Williams. I am the aunt of Marcus and Jaden Davis. They are staying with me for a family emergency, and I wanted to check on their attendance record to make sure I get them to class on time tomorrow. There was a pause, the sound of typing. One moment, let me look them up. Marcus and Jaden Davis. Yes. The typing continued. It seemed to take forever. Ma'am, the receptionist came back on the line. Her voice was different, hesitant. Yes. We do not have a current enrollment for a Jaden Davis. And Marcus Davis, well, his file has been flagged. Flagged for what? For truancy, Dr. Williams. Marcus hasn't attended a single day of class in 6 months. We sent letters to the home address. We tried to contact the mother. Eventually, according to our records, she withdrew him in January. She listed homeschooling as the reason. Homeschooling. I almost dropped the phone. Tanisha, the woman who thought the capital of Europe was France, was homeschooling. She pulled them out, I whispered. Yes, ma'am. Legally, she filed the intent to homeschool. But since then, we have had zero contact. We assumed they moved. Thank you, I said, my voice barely audible. I hung up. I looked out into the living room. Marcus was back wrestling with Jaden on the floor. They were shouting profanities that no child should know, words they undoubtedly learned from Kyle's video games or Tanisha's arguments. They weren't just abandoned for the week. They had been abandoned for months. Tanisha had pulled them out of school not to teach them, but because getting them ready in the morning interfered with her sleep. She had erased their education, their health, and their future, all to service her own laziness. And she was using their identities to steal money. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together with a terrifying finality. The credit card fraud I found yesterday was just the tip of the iceberg. She needed the kids to be ghosts. If they weren't in school, no teachers would see the neglect. No counselors would see the bruises or the rotting teeth. She kept them hidden, dumb, and dependent, breeding a new generation of failure to secure her government checks. I walked over to the window, looking at the spot where the police car had been. The officer had said it was a civil matter. He had said I should just work it out. He was wrong. This wasn't a civil matter. This was a rescue mission. I looked at Marcus again. He looked up, catching my eye. For a second, the anger in his face slipped, and I saw a scared little boy who knew he couldn't read the cereal box. I am not giving you back, I vowed silently. Tanisha thinks she dumped a burden on me. She doesn't realize she just handed me the evidence I need to bury her. I picked up my phone again. I didn't call the police. I didn't call the hospital. I dialed the number of the most ruthless family law attorney in Atlanta, a woman known for eating deadbeat parents for breakfast. It rang once. Barbara, I said when she answered. It is Zora. Clear your schedule. We are going to war. 3 days. That was how long it took for the silence to break. For 72 hours, I had been running a makeshift orphanage in my own home, juggling 4 traumatized children and a high-pressure medical career that I had to put on pause. I had scrubbed lice from Aaliyah's hair, taught Marcus how to hold a fork properly, and soothed Tyrell's diaper rash until his skin was no longer angry red. The house had fallen into a fragile rhythm, a quiet truce between the chaos of their upbringing and the order of my world. But I knew it wouldn't last. Parasites always return to the host when they run out of resources, and my sister and her husband were the most efficient parasites I had ever known. It was late Tuesday afternoon when the silver minivan limped back into view. I was in the kitchen blending a smoothie for the kids when I saw the familiar dented bumper pull not into the driveway, but around the side of the property, heading straight for the access road that led to the guest house. They didn't stop at the front door. They didn't honk to see their children. They didn't rush out to hug the babies they had abandoned for 3 days. Instead, the car screeched to a halt in front of the converted pool house I had renovated 2 years ago for visiting colleagues. I watched through the blinds as Tanisha shoved the car door open. She looked ragged. Her hair was unkempt, sticking up in strange angles, and she was wearing the same stained maternity leggings she had left in. Kyle stumbled out of the driver's seat, kicking an empty fast food bag across the gravel. They didn't look like people returning from a mountain retreat. They looked like people who had been sleeping in their car because their credit cards had been declined at the Motel 6. "Stay here," I told Marcus, who had looked up from his coloring book with a flash of fear in his eyes. "Do not open the door for anyone, unless I say so." I marched out the back door, crossing the expanse of the lawn. The humidity slapped me in the face, but my anger was hotter. By the time I reached the guest house, Kyle had already kicked the door in. The lock, which I had changed remotely via the smart system, gave way with a splintering crack of wood. "Excuse me?" I shouted, stepping onto the small porch. Tanisha spun around, startled. She was already raiding the kitchenette cupboards, looking for food that wasn't there. "Oh, look who it is," she sneered, slamming a cabinet door. "The warden." "Thanks for cutting the power, Zora. Do you know how hot it was in the car? I could have died of heat stroke." "You abandoned your children, Tanisha?" I said, my voice shaking with the effort to keep it steady. "You left them on a porch. You have been gone for 3 days with no contact. And the first thing you do when you get back is break into my property." "We didn't abandon them," Kyle said, emerging from the bathroom where he had apparently gone to check the water pressure. "We left them with their aunt. That is childcare, not abandonment. And we had to come back because you froze the account, Zora. We literally had no money for gas. We coasted in here on fumes. Do you know how embarrassing that is? I had to beg a cashier for a free bottle of water." "Embarrassing?" I laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. "You want to talk about embarrassment? Try explaining to the police why my sister swatted me. Try explaining to the school why your son hasn't attended class since January." Tanisha froze. Her eyes darted to mine, and for a second the mask slipped. She knew I knew. "I don't know what you are talking about," she muttered, turning back to the empty fridge. "Get out," I said. "Get off my property. I am not doing this anymore. You are not staying here." Tanisha turned around, her hands resting on her pregnant belly, her face twisting into that familiar weaponized pout. "Where are we supposed to go, Zora? We have no money. We have no gas. I am 8 months pregnant. You are kicking a pregnant woman onto the street." "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I am. Because that pregnant woman is a danger to everyone around her." I reached for my phone to call the police again, fully intending to report the break-in. But before I could unlock the screen, a shrill voice cut through the air like a siren. "Zora Elise Williams." I closed my eyes for a brief second. Of course. Tanisha had called for backup before they even arrived. Mama Hattie was marching across the lawn, moving faster than I had seen her move in years. She was wearing her Sunday church hat, wielding her cane like a sword. She must have been parked down the street waiting for the signal. "Don't you dare," Mama Hattie shouted, breathless, as she reached the steps. "Don't you dare put your sister out like a dog." "Mama! She broke into my house," I said, pointing at the splintered doorframe. "She left her kids for 3 days. She came back," Mama Hattie yelled, positioning herself between me and Tanisha. "She came back, didn't she?" "Mothers get tired, Zora. You wouldn't know because you are too busy counting your money to have a family, but raising 4 kids is hard work. She needed a break. And now she is home." "Home. This is not her home, Mama. This is my house, and I want them out. If you put her out," Mama Hattie said, her voice dropping to a low, trembling threat, Then you put me out too. I looked at her. Mama, don't do this. I mean it, Zora. If you cast out your own flesh and blood when they are down on their luck, when they are carrying a child, then I do not have a daughter named Zora. I will sit right here on this porch. I will not eat. I will not drink. I will wither away right here in front of your rich neighbors until you find a scrap of mercy in that cold heart of yours. It was a performance. I knew it was a performance, but it was a powerful one. Mama Hattie knew exactly where to hit. She knew that despite everything, I still craved her approval. She knew that I couldn't handle the public shame of my elderly mother starving herself on my lawn while the neighbors watched. I looked at Tanisha. She was smirking behind Mama's back. She had won again, or at least she thought she had. But as I looked at them standing there in their entitlement and filth, I remembered the conversation I had with Barbara, my shark of a lawyer, just hours ago. Keep them close, Zora, Barbara had said. If they leave, they disappear. We need them to feel comfortable. We need them to slip up. We need access to their financial records, and the best way to get that is if they are on your Wi-Fi in your space thinking they are safe. I took a deep breath, forcing my face to soften. Fine, I said. Tanisha let out a victorious breath. See, I knew you weren't heartless. But I continued, raising a finger. There are rules. You stay in the guest house. You do not come into the main house. I have changed the codes, and if you try to break in there, the alarm will trigger a silent call to the police, and I will not stop them this time. Whatever, Kyle grumbled. Just turn the power back on. And I added, looking directly at Tanisha. The kids stay with me. What? Tanisha bristled. No. They are my kids. You can't feed them, Tanisha. You just said you have no money. You have no food. The guest house has a mini fridge and a microwave. Are you going to feed 5 people with that? The kids stay in the main house where there is food, where there are beds, and where someone actually checks their homework. You can visit them during the day supervised. Tanisha opened her mouth to argue, but then she paused. I could see the gears turning in her head. If the kids stayed with me, she didn't have to watch them. She didn't have to change diapers. She didn't have to listen to the whining. It was basically the free nanny service she had always wanted. Fine, she shrugged, trying to look like she was doing me a favor. If you are so desperate to play mommy, go ahead. It will give me time to rest my back. Good, I said. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back at Mama Hattie, who was already bustling into the guest house to fuss over Tanisha. I walked straight to the main house and locked the door behind me. I went directly to my home office and pulled a business card from my locked drawer. It was a contact Barbara had given me, a private investigator named Mr. Vance. He specialized in forensic accounting and asset recovery. I dialed the number. Mr. Vance, I said when he answered. This is Zora Williams. I need to hire you for a deep dive. Name. His voice was gravelly and efficient. Kyle Davis, I said. And Tanisha Davis. I want to know everything. I want to know where the money from the credit cards went. I want to know about his so-called crypto investments. I want to know if they have opened any other accounts in my name or the children's names. I can have a preliminary report in 48 hours, Vance said. But digging into crypto wallets might take a bypass. Do they have access to your network? Not yet, I said. But they will. I hung up and sat back in my chair. I felt cold, calculating. The Zora who cried because her mother yelled at her was gone. The Zora who just wanted everyone to get along was dead. In her place was a woman who was setting a trap. That night, the heat broke and a heavy rain began to fall. I put the children to bed in the spare rooms. They were confused about why their parents were in the backyard, but not coming to say goodnight, but they were too tired and full of warm pasta to ask many questions. Around midnight, I couldn't sleep. I got up and went to the kitchen window that overlooked the backyard. The rain was coming down in sheets, blurring the lights of the guest house. Then I saw it. A shadow was moving along the fence line. It was Kyle. He was wearing a dark hoodie, hunching against the rain. He wasn't coming to the main house to beg or to see his kids. He was carrying a ladder from my garden shed. I watched, holding my breath, as he propped the ladder against the side of the guest house, right under the eaves where the main power line connected to the junction box. He had a spool of heavy-duty wire over his shoulder. He was splicing into the main line. I had cut the utilities to the guest house legally. Instead of asking me to turn them back on, instead of admitting defeat, he was risking electrocution to steal power. And then I saw the blue glow of a tablet in his hand as he huddled under the overhang. He wasn't just stealing power, he was holding the device up, moving it around, looking for a signal. He was trying to bridge into my Wi-Fi network. He was trying to hack back in. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I simply pulled out my phone, opened the camera app, and zoomed in. The night vision mode captured him perfectly, the sparks flying as he twisted the wires, the frantic way he tapped on the tablet. "Go ahead, Kyle," I whispered to the darkness. "Connect. Log in. Lead me right to your secrets." I turned away from the window. He thought he was being clever. He thought he was stealing from me. But he was just handing me the rope I would use to hang him. The game had changed. They were no longer guests. They were targets. And I was done missing. The morning sun rose over Atlanta with a vengeance, burning off the rain from the night before. But it could not cleanse the filth that had accumulated on the edge of my property line. I stood on my back patio, coffee in hand, staring across the manicured lawn toward the guest house. The structure, usually a pristine example of modern architecture, now looked like a squatter's camp. The blinds were drawn tight, shutting out the world, but the evidence of their occupation spilled out onto the grass. Overnight, Tanisha and Kyle had decided that walking 10 feet to the trash bins I provided was too much effort. Instead, they had simply opened the side door and tossed their refuse onto my lawn. Black plastic bags bursting at the seams lay in a heap. Empty fast food cups, beer cans, and pizza boxes were scattered like confetti, attracting a swarm of flies that buzzed in the humid air. It was a deliberate act of disrespect. It was Tanisha telling me that even if I controlled the house, I did not control her. She was marking her territory with garbage. I sighed, the sound loud in the morning stillness. I could have called the code enforcement officer. I could have marched over there and banged on the door until they woke up. But I had 4 children inside my main house who were finally sleeping peacefully, and I did not want to start a war before breakfast. I went into the garage and put on a pair of heavy-duty gardening gloves. I grabbed a roll of trash bags. If I was going to be the maid, I was going to be the most observant maid in history. My lawyer Barbara had told me to document everything. Trash, as it turned out, told a story. I walked over to the pile, the smell of sour milk and stale beer hitting me as I approached. I started shoving the loose debris into a new bag. Burger King wrappers. A receipt for a liquor store run that must have cost $50. I noted the date. Yesterday. They claimed they had no money for gas, yet they had money for vodka. I reached for a soggy cardboard box that had split open in the rain. It looked like an old file box, the kind you buy at an office supply store. It must have been in the trunk of their minivan and gotten tossed out to make room for more junk. As I lifted it, the wet bottom gave way, and a cascade of envelopes spilled onto the wet grass. I groaned, bending down to scoop them up. Most of them were unopened. The paper was damp, curling at the edges, but the red ink stamped on the front of the envelopes was still vibrant. Final notice. Past due. Immediate action required. Collection agency. I shook my head. I wasn't surprised. I knew Tanisha and Kyle were bad with money. I knew they dodged creditors like they dodged employment. I expected to see Kyle's name on these. I expected to see Tanisha's name. I picked up a window envelope from a major credit card company. The red block letters screamed that the account was in default and had been sent to collections. I glanced at the name above the address. Mr. Marcus Davis. I frowned. I wiped a droplet of rain off the plastic window. I read it again. Mr. Marcus Davis. My nephew. The 8-year-old boy who was currently asleep in my guest bedroom hugging a teddy bear. The boy who could barely read a cereal box. I felt a strange buzzing in my ears. This had to be a mistake. Maybe there was another Marcus Davis. Maybe it was a clerical error. I reached for another envelope. This one was from a car dealership financing department. It was a delinquency notice for a Dodge Charger. Ms. Aaliyah Davis. Aaliyah. My 3-year-old niece. A toddler who was still potty training had apparently defaulted on an auto loan. The buzzing in my ears turned into a roar. My hands, usually steady enough to measure micrograms of medication, began to tremble violently. I dropped the trash bag and fell to my knees in the wet grass, ignoring the stains spreading on my yoga pants. I started tearing open the envelopes, no longer caring about privacy laws or propriety. I ripped open a letter from a payday loan company. Dear Jaden Davis, failure to repay the principal amount of $5,000 has resulted in legal action. Jaden, 5 years old. I opened another, and another. Tyrell Davis, the baby. The 1-year-old who had just learned to walk. He had a credit card with a limit of $2,000 maxed out at a luxury sneaker store. I sat there in the middle of the yard, surrounded by a sea of red ink and wet paper, and I felt like I had been punched in the gut. This wasn't just irresponsibility. This wasn't just being bad with money. This was a felony. This was identity theft of the most heinous kind. Tanisha and Kyle had not just neglected their children. They had cannibalized them. They had taken the social security numbers of their own flesh and blood, likely days after they were born, and used them to build a house of cards. They had applied for credit cards, loans, and financing in the names of infants. They had run up tens of thousands of dollars in debt, bought clothes, cars, and games, and then simply stopped paying, letting the credit scores of their children crash and burn before they even knew what a credit score was. I looked at the letter addressed to Marcus again. The debt was from 3 years ago. They had started stealing from him when he was 5. By the time he turned 18, he wouldn't be able to rent an apartment. He wouldn't be able to get a student loan. He wouldn't be able to get a job that required a background check. His financial life was over before it had even begun. A wave of nausea washed over me. I remembered Tanisha's voice from yesterday. We need a mental health break. The stress is too much. The stress wasn't from parenting. The stress was from the juggling act. The stress was from keeping the mail hidden, keeping the kids out of school, so no administrators would see the collection calls, keeping them off the grid, so the facade wouldn't crack. I looked up at the guest house. It looked different to me now. It wasn't just a shelter for lazy relatives. It was a nest of vipers. And then a thought hit me so hard, I actually gasped aloud. The baby. The 5th pregnancy. I thought back to the gender reveal party, the excitement, the blue smoke, the way Kyle had rubbed his hands together, the way Tanisha had smirked when she talked about the new blessing. He is a gold mine, Kyle had said. I had thought he meant the tax credits. I thought he meant the welfare checks. But it was darker than that. Much darker. They didn't want another child. They didn't want to raise a son. They wanted a fresh social security number. Marcus, Jaden, Aaliyah, and Tyrell were tapped out. Their credit was ruined. They were useless to Tanisha and Kyle now. That was why they were so easily abandoned on my porch. That was why Tanisha didn't care if they stayed with me. They were discarded husks, empty accounts that could no longer yield cash. But the new baby. The unborn son. He was a blank slate. He was a pristine, untouched credit profile waiting to be exploited. He was worth $20,000, maybe $30,000 in fresh lines of credit before the banks caught on. They were breeding specifically to steal. I scrambled to my feet, gathering the wet papers into a pile. I couldn't leave them here. This was evidence. This was the smoking gun. This was the thing that would put them in prison for a very long time. I ran back to the garage, grabbing a clean plastic bin. I shoved the soggy envelopes inside, handling them like they were radioactive. I needed to dry them out. I needed to scan them. I needed to send them to Mr. Vance, the investigator. As I walked back toward the main house, clutching the bin to my chest, I caught a movement in the window of the guest house. The blinds parted slightly. I saw Tanisha's face. She looked tired, puffy, and annoyed. She was watching me clean up her trash, probably laughing at how she had turned her successful sister into her personal janitor. She didn't know what I had found. She didn't know that the garbage she tossed out so carelessly contained the keys to her destruction. I locked the back door and went straight to my home office. I laid the papers out on my desk to dry under the ceiling fan. Seeing the names of my innocent nephews and niece printed on collection notices filled me with a cold, terrifying rage. I picked up my phone and texted Barbara. I have the smoking gun. It is not just neglect. It is identity fraud. 4 counts, maybe 5. Then I texted Mr. Vance. Forget the crypto for a minute. Run a credit check on 4 minors. I am sending you the names and dates of birth. I think you are going to find a mountain of debt. I sat down in my leather chair and looked at the family photo on my desk. It was taken 5 years ago at a family reunion. Mama Hattie was smiling. Tanisha was pregnant with Aaliyah. I looked happy, naive, thinking that if I just worked hard enough and gave enough money, they would love me. I turned the photo face down. That Zora was gone. The Zora who sat in this chair now was a prosecutor, a judge, and an executioner. I heard footsteps upstairs. The kids were waking up. I heard the patter of little feet and the sound of Marcus arguing with Jaden about who got to use the bathroom first. I went to the stairs. I needed to make them breakfast. I needed to make sure they brushed their rotting teeth. But more than that, I needed to look them in the eye and promise them silently that this ended now. Tanisha thought the new baby was her ticket to a new car. She thought she was about to reset the cycle. She was wrong. She wasn't bringing a new credit line into the world. She was birthing the evidence that would ensure she never saw freedom again. I walked into the kitchen and started cracking eggs into a bowl. I beat them furiously, visualizing the plan. I couldn't just call the police with wet papers. They would say it was a mistake or that I planted it. I needed an admission. I needed to catch them in the act. I needed to give them exactly what they wanted. I pulled out my phone again and composed a message to Tanisha. It took every ounce of self-control not to type out my rage, but I kept it sweet. I kept it submissive. Tanisha, I have been thinking. You are right. Family helps family. I know things are tight. Let's have a dinner tonight. I want to discuss setting up a trust fund for the new baby and maybe helping you guys clear some debts so you can get a fresh start. I hit send. The trap was set. They were hungry. They were greedy. And they had no idea that the fresh start I was offering was a prison cell. The drive to downtown Atlanta was a blur of concrete and fury. I had the plastic bin buckled into the passenger seat of my Range Rover like a fragile passenger. Inside lay the dried, crinkled remains of my nieces' and nephews' financial futures. I did not go to the hospital. I did not go to the police station. I went straight to the glass-walled office of Barbara Vance, the toughest family law attorney in the state. Barbara was a woman who could smell blood in the water from 3 miles away. She had divorced billionaires and taken down senators. I needed her shark teeth. I dumped the bin onto her pristine mahogany conference table. The smell of mildew and garbage immediately filled the air, clashing with the scent of her expensive leather chairs. "What is this, Zora?" Barbara asked, peering over her rimless glasses. She did not look disgusted. She looked intrigued. "It is the smoking gun," I said, pacing the room. "My sister and her husband stole the social security numbers of their 4 children. They opened credit cards, took out car loans, and defaulted on everything. The kids have liens on them, Barbara. Marcus is 8 years old and he owes $5,000 to a payday lender." Barbara picked up a stiff water-stained letter. She read it silently, her face unreadable. Then she picked up another. And another. Finally, she took off her glasses and looked at me. "This is a federal crime, Zora. Identity theft, fraud, wire fraud if they did it online. This is serious prison time." "Good," I said, slamming my hand on the table. "Call the police. Have them arrested." I want them out of my guest house and in a cell by dinner time. Barbara sighed, and it was a sound that deflated my adrenaline. She leaned back in her chair. It is not that simple. What do you mean it is not simple? I pointed at the papers. The evidence is right there. It is evidence of debt, Barbara explained calmly. It is evidence that accounts were opened. But to prove Tanisha and Kyle did it, we need more. We need IP addresses. We need signatures. We need to prove they didn't just coerce the kids into signing something, or that a third party didn't do it. If we go to the police now, they will open an investigation. It will take months. They will interview Tanisha. She will claim she didn't know, or that it was a mistake, or that you planted these papers to frame her, and while that investigation drags on, she keeps the kids. She keeps the kids. I stared at her. But she is stealing from them. She is their mother, Zora. Unless there is immediate physical danger, the state is hesitant to remove children. Financial abuse is terrible, but in the eyes of Child Protective Services, it does not always warrant an emergency removal like physical abuse or starvation does. If we file this today, she will get a lawyer. She will play the victim. She will say, "You are a vindictive aunt, trying to steal her babies because you are jealous." And a judge might just believe her enough to leave the kids in her custody while the case proceeds. Do you want those kids disappearing with her for 6 months while we fight this? I sank into the chair, putting my head in my hands. The system was broken. It was designed to protect the parents' rights, not the children's safety. So what do? I asked, my voice hollow. Do I just let them keep doing it? They are planning to do it to the new baby Barbara. That is why she is pregnant. It is just another credit line to them. Barbara leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a cold intelligence. No, we do not let them do it. But we do not play defense anymore. We play offense. You said they are greedy. You said they are desperate. I confirmed. They broke into my guest house because they were out of gas money. Then we use that, Barbara said. We need a confession. Or at least we need them to admit to the financial state of the family in front of a witness who is not you. We need to trap them in a lie so big that even the slowest police officer cannot ignore it. We need to make them feel safe enough to brag or desperate enough to sign a deal with the devil. A deal with the devil, I repeated. I left Barbara's office with a plan that made my stomach turn, but my resolve harden. I needed a witness, someone impeccable, someone the family respected but who Tanisha feared. Someone who could testify in court and destroy Mama Hattie's narrative of the poor, persecuted mother. There was only one person. I drove to the south side of the city to a small brick bungalow with a manicured lawn that put mine to shame. This was the home of my great-aunt Eunice. Eunice was Mama Hattie's older sister, but they were nothing alike. Where Hattie was dramatic, manipulative, and enabling, Eunice was stern, upright, and brutally honest. She was a retired school principal who commanded silence with a single look. She and Hattie hadn't spoken properly in 5 years, ever since Eunice told Tanisha at a Thanksgiving dinner that she needed to stop having babies she couldn't afford. Mama Hattie had called Eunice jealous. Eunice had called Hattie a fool. I knocked on the door. It opened immediately. Eunice stood there, tall and imposing, in a floral housecoat, smelling of peppermint and old Bibles. "Zora," she said, not smiling, but her eyes were warm. "You look like you have been fighting a war." "I have, Auntie," I said. "And I am losing." I sat in her living room drinking the sweet tea she poured, and I told her everything. I told her about the fire, the swatting, the abandonment, and then I told her about the identity theft. When I finished, Eunice set her teacup down. The porcelain rattled against the saucer. Her face was grim. "I knew Hattie was ruining that girl," Eunice said, her voice low and angry. "I told her 20 years ago. You give a child everything they want, and they grow up thinking the world owes them a living. But this stealing from those babies..." She shook her head, looking at the photos I had taken of the debt letters. "That is evil, Zora. That is plain evil." "I need your help, Auntie," I said. "I am going to call a family meeting. I am going to pretend to give in. I am going to offer to pay off their debts. but I need a witness. I need someone there to hear them admit that these debts exist. I need someone to see them sign the papers Barbara drew up. And you want me to be the judge, Eunice said. I want you to be the hammer, I corrected. Eunice stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at her garden. Hattie called me yesterday, she said. She told me you kicked Tanisha out. She said you were being possessed by the devil. She asked me to pray for you. I let out a bitter laugh. Of course she did. I did pray for you. Eunice turned back her eyes sharp. I prayed you would find the strength to stop them. I will come, Zora. You set the table. I will bring the grace. And then we will bring the judgment. I drove back to my house feeling a strange sense of calm. I had the law on my side even if it was slow. I had Aunt Eunice on my side. And I had the one weapon Tanisha could never resist. Money. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was quiet. The kids were inside, probably watching TV. The guest house was dark, but I knew they were in there leeching off my power, eating the food I had stocked in the mini fridge, waiting for me to break. They expected me to come over and yell. They expected a fight. They thrived on conflict because it allowed them to play the victim. I walked into my kitchen and saw the kids. Marcus was trying to help Aaliyah open a juice box. He looked up at me, fearful. Is Mom coming back? He asked. Yes, baby, I said, smoothing his hair. She is coming over tonight. We are going to have a big dinner. I went to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. I unlocked my phone. I opened the text thread with Tanisha. The last message was from her, a stream of angry emojis and threats about suing me for distress. I took a deep breath. I had to type the words that tasted like ash in my mouth. I had to lie to catch a liar. Tanisha, I typed. I have been thinking. You are right. Family helps family. I paused. My thumb hovered over the screen. It felt wrong to apologize to an abuser. But I looked at the file on my nightstand, the one containing Marcus's ruined credit report. I did it for him. I know things are tight. I continued typing. I don't want us to fight anymore. I want to help. Let's have a dinner tonight. I want to discuss setting up a trust fund for the new baby, and maybe helping you guys clear some debts so you can get a fresh start. I added a few heart emojis for good measure. It was bait. Pure, unadulterated bait. Tanisha didn't care about apologies. She cared about the words trust fund and clear some debts. I hit send. I stared at the screen. 1 minute passed. 2 minutes. 3 bubbles appeared. About time her reply came through. I knew you would come to your senses. Stress is bad for the baby, Zora. You really scared me. But I am willing to forgive you if you are serious. I grit my teeth. I am serious, I typed back. I will have a contract drawn up just to keep things official for the accountants. Bring Kyle. And bring Mama. We will do it properly. Kyle says we need at least 50,000 to start, she replied instantly. For the baby's future. 50,000. They had a number ready. They had probably been discussing how much they could squeeze out of me while eating the sandwiches I bought. We can discuss the amount at dinner, I replied. 7 p.m. Don't be late. I put the phone down. The trap was set. They were walking right into it, blinded by dollar signs. They thought they were coming to a coronation where I would bow down and hand over my checkbook. They didn't know they were coming to a deposition. I went downstairs and started cooking. I didn't order catering. I cooked. I made mac and cheese, collard greens, and fried chicken. I made the comfort food they loved, the food that made them feel safe and lethargic. I wanted them full. I wanted them relaxed. I wanted their guards down. As the smell of frying chicken filled the house, I felt like a witch brewing a potion. This wasn't a meal. It was the Last Supper. I checked the dining room. I set the table with my best china. And at the head of the table, hidden under a stack of napkins, I placed the remote control for the projector I had set up in the living room. Barbara had sent over the documents. They weren't checks, they were affidavits. admission of guilt forms disguised as financial aid agreements, and if they refused to sign those, I had the slideshow ready. I heard a car pull up outside. I looked out the window. It wasn't Tanisha yet. It was Aunt Eunice. She stepped out of her Buick holding a Tupperware of her famous peach cobbler, looking like a general arriving at the front lines. The Allies were assembling. The enemy was hungry. And tonight the war for these children would finally end. The smell of fried chicken and collard greens hung heavy in the humid Atlanta air, masking the scent of betrayal that had permeated my home for days. I stood by the kitchen island wiping my hands on a dish towel, watching the driveway through the window. When the silver minivan pulled up, it did not limp this time. It arrived with a sense of occasion. Kyle honked the horn a short, arrogant blast that signaled their arrival not as guests, but as conquerors coming to collect their tribute. I checked the hidden audio recorder in my apron pocket one last time. It was recording. I checked the small camera lens disguised as a carbon monoxide detector in the dining room. It was live. I looked at Aunt Eunice, who was sitting in the corner of the living room knitting a blanket with a rhythmic, predatory click of her needles. She nodded at me, a silent signal that she was ready to play her part. The front door opened without a knock. Mama Hattie led the procession, her cane tapping loudly on the hardwood floor. She was wearing her Sunday best, a bright yellow dress that clashed violently with the somber reality of what we were about to do. Behind her, Tanisha waddled in, clutching her belly with one hand and holding onto Kyle's arm with the other. They looked smug. They looked like people who had just won the lottery without buying a ticket. Zora, baby mama. Hattie cried out, opening her arms wide, as if the last 3 days of screaming and starvation threats had never happened. Look at you, cooking for your family. This is the daughter I raised. I knew you would come back to Jesus. I told Tanisha, I said Zora has a hard head, but she has a soft heart. She knows what family means. I let her hug me. Her perfume was overpowering, but underneath it I smelled the stale odor of the guest house. I forced a smile stiff and painful. Welcome home, Mama, I said. Tanisha. Kyle. I am glad you came. Tanisha walked past me, sniffing the air. You made mac and cheese. Good. I have been craving it. And I hope you used the sharp cheddar, not that cheap stuff. I used the best, Tanisha, I said. Only the best for the baby. Kyle clapped his hands together, looking around the kitchen as if he were measuring it for new appliances. Well, it smells great, Zora. I am glad we could put all this ugliness behind us. We are willing to move forward if you are. I gritted my teeth so hard my jaw ached. Thank you, Kyle. That is very big of you. We moved to the dining room. I had set the table with my grandmother's china, the plates with the gold rim that we only used for Christmas. I placed Tanisha at the head of the table, a symbolic surrender that made her eyes light up. Aunt Eunice joined us, sitting quietly across from Kyle. Oh, Eunice, Mama Hattie said, slightly annoyed. I didn't know you were coming. I invited her, I said quickly as I poured iced tea. I thought it was important to have an elder witness our new agreement, to bless the baby's future. Mama Hattie preened. You are right. It is a blessing. We ate in a strange, tension-filled harmony. Tanisha ate like she hadn't seen food in a week, piling her plate high with chicken and greens. Kyle drank the expensive wine I had put out, his confidence growing with every sip. For 20 minutes we talked about the weather, the neighbors, and the church, avoiding the elephant in the room. Finally, when the plates were cleared and I brought out the peach cobbler, Tanisha wiped her mouth and leaned back. So she said, getting down to business. You mentioned a trust fund. And clearing debts. Yes, I said, clasping my hands on the table. I want to make sure the baby has a clean slate, and I want you and Kyle to be stress-free so you can be good parents. I know I have been harsh about money. I want to fix that. But I need to know exactly what we are dealing with. Tanisha exchanged a look with Kyle. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a napkin this time. It was a typed list. They had prepared a manifesto. Well, Kyle said, smoothing the paper out on the tablecloth. We have done some calculations to really get us back on our feet, And to secure the baby's future, we are looking at a few things. He slid the paper toward me. I looked at it and I had to physically restrain myself from laughing out loud. It was not a request for help. It was a ransom note. Item 1. Kyle read, pointing with a fork. The credit cards. We have about 40,000 in outstanding debt. Mostly baby stuff medical bills, you know how it is. We need that wiped so we can buy a house one day. I nodded slowly. 40,000. That matched the stolen debt on the kids' accounts almost perfectly. Okay, I said softly. What else? Item 2, Tanisha chimed in. Transportation. The minivan is a death trap, Zora. The brakes are bad. We can't put a newborn in that. Kyle wants to start driving for Uber Black to bring in some extra income, but you need a luxury car for that. Uber Black. I looked at Kyle. Yeah, Kyle said, leaning forward earnestly. It is a great investment. I was thinking a Tesla Model X, or maybe a Tahoe. Something safe but classy. If you put the down payment and the first year of payments, I can handle the rest with the earnings. I looked at Aunt Eunice. Her face was stone, but her eyes were burning. A Tesla. For a man who hadn't held a job in 4 years. And the living situation, Tanisha added, waving her hand vaguely. The guest house is okay for now, but it is too small for 5 kids. If we are going to stay there to help you out with the property, we need to expand. We need to knock down that wall between the bedroom and the living area. And the bathroom needs a jacuzzi tub. For my back, water therapy is essential for postpartum recovery. I stared at them. They wanted me to pay off their fraud, buy them a luxury car, and renovate my own property to suit their tastes. They didn't just want help, they wanted to strip me clean. Mama Hattie nodded in agreement. That sounds reasonable, Zora. A jacuzzi would be good for the baby too. You can afford it. You have that big hospital salary. You are single. What else are you going to spend it on? I took a sip of water to wash down the bile rising in my throat. So if I agree to this, I said, my voice steady. If I pay the 40,000, buy the car and renovate the house. That is it. No more surprises. That is it. Kyle smiled, showing teeth that were stained with wine. We are a family again, and we will let you see the kids whenever you want. We won't even charge you for babysitting. He laughed at his own joke. Tanisha giggled. I stood up. Okay, I think we can make this work. I have some paperwork in my office that my lawyer drew up. Just standard stuff to organize the payments. Let me go get it. I walked into the kitchen, pretending to look for dessert spoons. From the doorway, I could still see the dining table. I saw Kyle lean over and kiss Tanisha's belly. He placed his hand on the mound of her stomach with a possessiveness that made my skin crawl. You did good, babe, I heard him whisper. The microphone in the centerpiece picked it up clearly in my earpiece. This little guy is going to change our luck. He is a gold mine. Daddy's little gold mine. Tanisha laughed, stroking his hand. I told you she would cave. She is weak. She needs us. Just imagine that Tesla baby. We are going to be rolling in style. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the countertop. Gold mine. He had said it. He had confirmed exactly what I suspected. The child wasn't a person to them. He was a financial asset, a tool to extort me and a fresh identity to steal. I took a deep breath. I had the audio. But I needed one more thing. I needed to prove their intent to steal from me directly right now, to destroy any defense they might mount in court. I walked back into the dining room. I am sorry, I said, patting my pockets. I think I left the folder in my upstairs office, and I need to use the restroom. Kyle, would you mind helping me clear the dessert plates while I run up? Actually, Kyle said, jumping up a little too quickly, I need to use the bathroom too. That wine goes right through me. He didn't head for the guest bathroom near the kitchen. He headed for the hallway that led to my home office and the master suite. Make yourself at home, I said. I sat back down. Tanisha was busy scraping the last of the cobbler from the dish. Mama Hattie was humming a hymn. Aunt Eunice looked at me and raised an eyebrow. I tapped my phone under the table, switching the view to the camera inside my home office. On the small screen, I saw the door to my office creak open. Kyle slipped inside. He didn't turn on the light. He moved by the glow of the street lamp outside. He wasn't going to the bathroom. He walked straight to my desk. He didn't look for a folder. He sat down in my chair and woke up my computer. I watched as the blue light of the monitor illuminated his face. He looked focused, intense. He pulled a flash drive from his pocket. My heart hammered against my ribs. He wasn't just checking his email. He was trying to install something. A keylogger spyware. Or maybe he was just trying to guess my banking password. I saw him type. Password 123. Incorrect. Zora 1988. Incorrect. He cursed softly, looking around the desk. He started opening my drawers, rifling through my papers. He found my checkbook. I watched as he tore a check from the back of the book, folded it quickly, and shoved it into his pocket. Then he went back to the computer. He pulled out his phone and took a picture of my bank statement that I had foolishly left in the pending tray. He was gathering data. He was preparing to drain me dry the moment the trust fund money hit the account. I looked up at Tanisha across the table. She was smiling, oblivious, dreaming of her jacuzzi. "Is everything okay?" she asked, noticing my stare. "You look intense." "Everything is perfect, Tanisha," I said, my voice cold as ice. "I was just thinking about how much I love this family, and how much I am going to enjoy this next part." I stood up. I didn't go upstairs. I walked over to the sideboard where I had set up the projector connection. Kyle thinks he is stealing a check, I thought, but he is actually signing his own arrest warrant. I picked up the remote. "Mama, Auntie Eunice, Tanisha," I said loudly. Before we signed the papers, I prepared a little presentation, a celebration of our family history. I think Kyle should see this too. I pressed the power button. The large white screen I had pulled down over the living room window flickered to life. But it wasn't a slideshow of family photos, it was the live feed from my office. And there, 10 feet high on the wall, was Kyle hunched over my desk, stuffing my checkbook into his pants. The house settled into a silence that felt less like peace and more like the holding of breath before a scream. The dinner plates were washed and stacked. The dishwasher hummed its rhythmic cycle, washing away the remnants of the meal I had served to the people who were actively destroying my life. Tanisha and Kyle had retreated to the guest house hours ago, drunk on my wine and high on the promise of a trust fund that did not exist. They were probably sleeping soundly, dreaming of Teslas and jacuzzi tubs, oblivious to the fact that they had just performed for a camera that would seal their fate. I walked through the darkened hallway of the main house, my footsteps silent on the plush runner. I should have been celebrating. I had the footage. I had the audio of Kyle calling his unborn son a gold mine. I had the check he stole. I had Aunt Eunice as a witness. The trap was perfect. But as I reached the door of the guest bedroom where the children slept, I did not feel like a victor. I felt a crushing weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. I pushed the door open just a crack. The soft glow of the nightlight cast long shadows across the room. There were 2 twin beds and a portable crib I had rushed to buy. Marcus and Jaden were in the beds. Aaliyah was curled up on a pallet of thick blankets on the floor because she was afraid of falling out of a strange bed. Tyrell was asleep in the crib, his thumb in his mouth, his breathing soft and even. I stepped inside, moving like a ghost. I looked at them. For the first time in years, they were clean, really clean. I had scrubbed the dirt from under their fingernails. I had washed their hair until the smell of stale smoke and neglect was replaced by the scent of lavender baby shampoo. Their bellies were full of nutritious food, not fast food grease. In just 3 days, the dark circles under their eyes had started to fade. They looked like children again, not like little survivalists fighting for scraps. I sat down in the rocking chair in the corner watching them. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sudden. I was about to blow up their world. I was about to put their mother and father in prison. I knew it was necessary. I knew it was the only way to save them. But the guilt was a living thing gnawing at my stomach. Was I doing the right thing? Was tearing a family apart ever truly a victory? I looked at Marcus's sleeping face. He looked so much like Tanisha did when we were kids, before the bitterness and the entitlement twisted her. Doubt whispered in my ear. Maybe I could just pay the debts. Maybe I could condition the money on therapy. Maybe I could force them to change without the police. Then a small voice cut through the darkness. Auntie Zora. I jumped slightly. Marcus was awake. He was sitting up in bed clutching the stuffed bear I had bought him yesterday. His eyes were wide and dark, reflecting the nightlight. I am here, baby, I whispered, moving to the side of his bed. Go back to sleep. Everything is okay. Marcus didn't lay down. He looked at the door, then back at me, his expression anxious. Mom and Dad came back tonight, he said. I heard them laughing downstairs. Yes, I said, smoothing the blanket over his legs. We had dinner. They are sleeping in the guest house. Marcus swallowed hard. His fingers tightened around the bear's neck. Are they going to take us back? He asked. His voice was so small, so filled with dread, that it broke my heart. Do you want to go back? I asked gently. He didn't answer immediately. He looked down at his lap. They have a PlayStation, he murmured. But there is no food. And the lights go out a lot. And sometimes... He stopped. Sometimes what, Marcus? Sometimes they give us the purple juice, he whispered. I froze. My pharmacist brain kicked into high gear. Purple juice. What purple juice, baby? Is it grape juice? No, he shook his head vigorously. It tastes like medicine. Bad medicine. Mom says it is magic sleeping juice. She says we make too much noise when Dad is playing his game, so we have to drink the juice to calm down. I felt the blood drain from my face. I gripped the edge of the mattress to keep my hands from shaking. Does she give it to you often? I asked, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. Every time they want to play, he said. Or when Tyrell cries too much. It makes my head feel heavy. And I can't wake up even if I have to pee. That is why Jaden wets the bed sometimes. He can't wake up. I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to scream. Diphenhydramine. Or maybe codeine promethazine. They were dosing their children. They were chemically restraining 4 kids, including an infant, with sedatives, just so they could play video games without interruption. This wasn't just neglect. This wasn't just financial abuse. This was physical assault. Giving high doses of sedatives to children, especially a baby like Tyrell, could cause respiratory depression. It could kill them. My doubt evaporated. It vanished like smoke in a hurricane. The guilt I had felt 5 minutes ago was replaced by a cold, hard resolve that felt like steel in my spine. I looked at Marcus, this brave little boy who thought being drugged was normal. Marcus, listen to me, I said, taking his hand. I am never going to let anyone give you that juice again. Do you hear me? Never. He looked up at me, his lower lip trembling. But if they go away, will you keep us? Or will you throw us away too? Mom says nobody wants us because we are bad kids. She says we are expensive mistakes. Oh God, the emotional damage, the poison she had poured into their ears. You are not a mistake, I said fiercely, pulling him into a hug. You are a blessing, and I am not throwing you away. You are staying here. This is your home now, I promise. He clung to me, burying his face in my neck. I held him until his breathing slowed, until he fell back into a natural, drug-free sleep. I stood up and walked out of the room. I didn't walk softly this time. I walked with purpose. I went downstairs to my office and poured myself a glass of water, though I wanted something stronger. I needed a clear head. I looked at the clock. It was 2 a.m. I sat at my desk and looked at the pile of evidence. It wasn't enough. I needed to bury them. I needed to make sure they never saw the light of day again. Neglect and fraud might get them a few years, maybe probation if they had a good lawyer. But drugging children? That was a different level. My phone buzzed on the desk, startling me. I looked at the screen. It was Mr. Vance, the private investigator. At 2 a.m., I picked it up immediately. "Mr. Vance?" I asked. "Zora." His voice was rough, like he had been smoking a pack of cigarettes. "I know it is late, but you told me to dig deep into Kyle's crypto accounts. Did you find the money from the credit cards?" I asked. I found that, Vance said. "He funneled about 40 grand into various wallets. But Zora, that is the small stuff." I kept digging. I traced the transaction history on his main wallet. He is not just losing money trading Bitcoin, he is moving volume. Big volume. "What do you mean?" "I mean, in the last 6 months, over $200,000 has moved through an account registered to his email. It comes in from offshore wallets, in small batches, gets tumbled through a mixer, and goes out to accounts that are flagged by the feds." I sat up straighter. Wait. Kyle is unemployed. He plays video games all day. How is he moving $200,000? "He is a mule," Zora Vance said. "He is laundering money. Probably for a local gang or a drug ring. He thinks he is a savvy investor, but he is just a digital bagman. He takes a cut of clean cash for washing their dirty coins. That is where he got the money for the flashy stuff he buys occasionally." My mouth went dry. Money laundering, organized crime. "If the feds catch him," Vance continued, "they will seize everything, the computers, the accounts, and if he is using your IP address—" "He broke into my network tonight," I said, looking at the router lights blinking in the corner. "He is connected right now." "Then you need to move fast," Vance said. "If he is doing transactions on your Wi-Fi, you are an accessory until proven otherwise." But here is the kicker. I found a transaction scheduled for tomorrow morning. A big one. 50 grand. 50 grand. That was the exact amount they asked me for. "He is going to use your trust fund money to front a laundering deal," Vance realized. "He needs your clean cash to buy the crypto to wash." "Thank you, Mr. Vance," I said. "Send me the file. Everything you have." I hung up. I sat there in the silence of my office. The picture was complete. They weren't just bad parents. They were criminals on every level. They abused their children physically with drugs. They abused them financially with identity theft. And now they were bringing federal crimes into my home. I looked at the window. I could see the light of the guest house. Kyle was probably up glued to his screen waiting for my check to clear so he could play gangster one last time. He thought tomorrow was going to be payday. He thought he was going to walk away with a check and a new car. I picked up the remote for the projector again, feeling the weight of it in my hand. "Tomorrow is payday, Kyle," I whispered. "But the currency is justice, and I am going to make sure you pay every single cent." I turned off the lamp. I didn't need light anymore. I had the truth. And when the sun came up, I was going to burn their world down to the ground. The living room was buzzing with a low hum of anticipation that felt almost electric against my skin. It was barely 8 in the evening, but the room felt suffocatingly full. Mama Hattie had really outdone herself with the guest list. She hadn't just invited Aunt Eunice. She had called Pastor Jenkins, the head deacon of our church, and 3 of my cousins who were known for being the family news broadcasters. She wanted an audience. She wanted witnesses to what she believed was my capitulation. To her, this wasn't just a signing of papers. It was a public restoration of Tanisha's status and a humbling of my pride. Tanisha sat in the center of the plush velvet sofa like a queen holding court. She had changed into a flowing white maternity dress that was clearly new, likely bought with another maxed-out credit card that was under my 5-year-old nephew's name. She stroked her belly absent-mindedly, smiling at Pastor Jenkins, who was congratulating her on the new blessing. Kyle sat next to her, looking uncomfortable in a button-down shirt that was too tight around the neck. He kept tapping his foot, his eyes darting toward the hallway where my office was, probably wondering if the check he had stolen was safe in his pocket or if he needed to cash it immediately. I stood by the fireplace holding the remote control behind my back. My hands were cold, but my heart was beating with a slow, heavy rhythm. I looked at Marcus, Jaden, and Aaliyah, who were sitting quietly on the rug near Aunt Eunice. They looked clean and fed, but their eyes were wide with confusion. They sensed the tension. They knew that when the adults gathered like this, shouting usually followed. Aunt Eunice caught my eye. She gave a microscopic nod, her knitting needles clicking steadily. She was the only one who knew that the projector screen pulled down over the bay window wasn't for a slideshow of baby pictures. "All right, everyone." Mama Hattie clapped her hands, commanding the room's attention. "Let's get started. We are all here to witness a beautiful moment of reconciliation. The devil tried to break this family apart, but God is good. Zora has agreed to step up and support her sister and the new baby." "Amen." Pastor Jenkins boomed, nodding approvingly at me. "It is a blessed thing to be a cheerful giver, Sister Zora." Tanisha beamed, extending her hand toward me. "Come on, Zora. Let's sign the papers. Kyle has the pen. We are ready to start this new chapter." Kyle pulled a pen from his pocket, grinning. "Yeah, Zora. Let's get the boring stuff out of the way so we can celebrate." I stepped forward. I didn't walk toward the coffee table where the papers lay. I walked to the center of the room, standing between the family and the large white screen. I looked at them. I looked at the pastor, a man who had baptized me. I looked at my cousins. I looked at my mother, whose face was shining with triumph. And finally, I looked at Tanisha and Kyle. "Before we sign," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the murmurs, "I think it is important that we all understand exactly what we are investing in." Tanisha mentioned a fresh start. Kyle mentioned the future. "I think we need to look at the past to understand the future." Tanisha frowned, her hand faltering on her belly. "What is this, Zora? We don't need a speech. Just sign the check." "I think you do need a speech," I said. "Or rather, a visual aid." I raised the remote and pressed the power button. The projector hummed to life, casting a bright, harsh light into the dimly lit room. Dust motes danced in the beam. Everyone turned to look at the screen. The first image appeared. It was not a photo. It was a PDF document blown up to 5 feet tall. The red letters at the top were unmistakable. Credit report Equifax. Name Marcus Jamal Davis. Age 8. Score 420. A ripple of confusion went through the room. Pastor Jenkins squinted, adjusting his glasses. Is that a credit report?" one of my cousins whispered. I didn't answer. I clicked the next slide. Status delinquent. Payday loan $5,000. Term defaulted. I clicked again. Name Aliyah Davis. Age 3. Auto loan repossession order. I clicked again. Name Tyrell Davis. Age 1. Credit card balance $2,400. Status collections. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of everyone's lungs. Tanisha's smile had vanished. Her face had gone a sickly shade of gray. Kyle stopped tapping his foot. He looked like he wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't work. "What is this?" Mama Hattie asked, her voice trembling. "Zora, what are you showing us? Why are the children's names on these papers?" I turned to look at her. "These aren't just papers, Mama. These are their lives." Tanisha and Kyle stole the social security numbers of their own children. They opened credit cards, took out car loans, and borrowed money from predatory lenders in the names of babies who can't even read. I pointed at the screen where Marcus's ruined score loomed over us. Marcus is 8 years old. He is already bankrupt. By the time he is 18, he won't be able to rent an apartment, get a student loan, or get a job. They have eaten their children's futures to buy video games and fast food. Liar, Tanisha screamed, jumping up so fast she knocked her water glass over. It shattered on the floor. "That is fake. You made that up. You are trying to frame us." I didn't flinch. I simply pressed the next button. The screen went black for a second, then a video file began to play. The audio was crisp and clear. It was the recording from the dining room taken less than an hour ago. The room watched in horror as Kyle's face filled the screen, leaning over Tanisha's belly. His voice boomed through the surround sound speakers. "This little guy is going to change our luck. He is a gold mine. Daddy's little gold mine." Then Tanisha's voice, laughing. I told you she would cave. She is weak. Just imagine that Tesla baby. The video cut to black. I looked at Pastor Jenkins. His mouth was hanging open. He looked from the screen to Kyle, a look of pure disgust on his face. A gold mine, the pastor whispered. You called a child a gold mine. But I wasn't done. And just in case you think that was taken out of context, I said, my voice hardening. Let's look at what Kyle did while he said he was going to the bathroom tonight. I clicked the final button. The footage from my office camera played. It was grainy shot in night vision, but undeniable. There was Kyle hunched over my desk. There were his hands rifling through my drawers. There was the moment he tore the check from my book and shoved it into his pocket. The room erupted. My cousins were gasping. Aunt Eunice stood up, pointing a knitting needle at Kyle like a weapon. You thief, she shouted. You low-down, dirty thief. Kyle scrambled back, knocking over his chair. He looked wild, cornered. It is not what it looks like, he stammered, holding his hands up. I was borrowing it. We were going to pay it back. Zora said she was going to give us money anyway. I walked over to him. I was close enough to smell the fear on him. I didn't say I was giving you money, Kyle. I said I wanted to give you a fresh start. And I will. I turned to Tanisha. She was shaking, clutching her stomach, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of pain this time. They were tears of terror. You poisoned your kids with sedatives so you could play games. I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. Marcus told me about the purple juice, Tanisha. A gasp went through the room. Mama Hattie grabbed her chest. Purple juice, Mama Hattie whispered. You drugged them. Tanisha, tell me you didn't drug those babies. Tanisha couldn't speak. She just sobbed, shaking her head, looking for an exit that didn't exist. I turned back to the crowd. This isn't a family meeting, I announced. It is an intervention. And it is a crime scene. Mama Hattie stood up. Her legs were shaking, but her denial was a fortress that wouldn't fall easily. She looked at the screen, then at Tanisha, then at me. She couldn't accept it. To accept it meant admitting she had enabled a monster. This is fake, she said, her voice rising to a shriek. Zora, you did this. You are good with computers. You photoshopped those papers. You dubbed those voices. How could you do this to your sister? She is pregnant. You are trying to stress her out so she loses the baby. Mama, stop, I said, feeling a wave of pity for her delusion. No, Mama. Hattie screamed, creating a scene to distract from the truth. You are jealous. You have always been jealous because she has a husband and children, and you have nothing but cats and money. Get out of my way. She rushed toward the screen as if she could tear the images down with her bare hands. Pastor Jenkins stepped in front of her. Sister Hattie, sit down. We saw what we saw. That was Kyle on that video. That was his voice. Don't you tell me what I saw. Mama Hattie yelled, pushing the pastor. It is AI. It is a deepfake. Zora is a witch. Kyle saw his opening. While everyone was looking at Mama Hattie, he lunged for the back door. He didn't care about Tanisha. He didn't care about the baby. He just wanted to run with the check in his pocket. He made it 3 steps before the kitchen door burst open. He didn't make it out. He ran straight into the chest of a uniformed federal agent. Behind him, 2 more officers and a detective in a cheap suit stepped into the kitchen. The room froze. Mama Hattie stopped screaming. Tanisha stopped crying. Kyle stumbled back, his face draining of all color. Kyle Davis, the lead agent, asked, his voice calm and authoritative. Kyle looked around, trapped. We have a warrant for your arrest, the agent continued, stepping into the living room, along with Tanisha Davis. Mama Hattie slumped onto the sofa, her hand over her mouth. Arrest, she whispered. For what? The agent looked at the screen where the credit report of a 1-year-old baby was still glowing. For identity theft, wire fraud, child endangerment, and money laundering, the agent said. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Happy birthday to the gold mine, I thought, as the metal clicked around Kyle's wrists. Tanisha let out a scream that wasn't acting. It was the primal sound of a reality crashing down. Zora, she wailed, reaching out to me. Help me! Don't let them take me, I am pregnant. I stood still. I didn't reach back. You should have thought about that before you stole Marcus's name, I said. The party was over. The trap had sprung. And as the agents moved toward Tanisha, I looked at Aunt Eunice. She wasn't smiling. She was crying silently. We had won, but the cost was sitting right there on the screen in red numbers. We had saved the children, but we had lost the family. And looking at the wreckage, I knew this was the only way it could have ended. The chaos that erupted in my dining room was not the slow burn of a family argument, but the violent explosion of a life built on lies. Kyle did not freeze when he saw the badge of the federal agent standing in the kitchen doorway. He did not drop to his knees in surrender. Instead, the animal instinct of a trapped predator took over. His eyes wide and bloodshot with panic, darted from the agent to the back door and then finally locked onto me. I was standing by the fireplace, the remote control still in my hand, the architect of his destruction. You! Kyle roared a sound that was less human and more guttural. He lunged. He did not run for the exit. He ran for me. He knocked over the heavy oak dining chair with a crash that shook the floorboards. His hands were clawed, reaching for my throat. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He wanted to hurt me. He wanted to silence the woman who had dared to expose him. Zora, look out! Aunt Eunice screamed, dropping her knitting. I flinched, bracing myself for the impact, but it never came. Two men who had been sitting quietly in the corner of the room, men I had introduced earlier as my colleagues from the hospital pharmacy board, surged forward. They were not pharmacists. They were undercover detectives from the Financial Crimes Division who had been waiting for the signal. One of them, a linebacker of a man named Detective Miller, tackled Kyle mid-air. They hit the floor with a bone-jarring thud that rattled the china in the cabinets. Kyle thrashed and kicked, screaming obscenities, but Detective Miller pinned him down with practiced ease, twisting his arm behind his back until Kyle let out a yelp of pain. "Stay down!" Miller barked, pressing his knee into Kyle's spine. "Do not move!" The room was screaming. Mama Hattie was shrieking, clutching her chest. My cousins were huddled against the wall, terrified. But I stood still, watching the man who had called my nephew a gold mine, now eating the dust from my rug. Tanisha sat frozen on the sofa, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. She looked at Kyle, then at the agents, waiting for someone to tell her this was a prank. "It is not a prank, Tanisha," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. The lead federal agent, the one who had entered from the kitchen, walked into the center of the room. He was holding a folder. He looked at Tanisha with cold, professional indifference. "Tanisha Davis," he said, his voice booming. "Please stand up and place your hands behind your back." Tanisha didn't move. She shook her head rapidly. "No. No, you can't arrest me. I am pregnant. You can't arrest a pregnant woman. It is against the law." "Zora, tell them." The agent stepped closer, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metallic rattle was the loudest sound in the room. "You are under arrest for 4 counts of aggravated identity theft, 4 counts of child endangerment, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and money laundering." He reached down and pulled her up by her arm. Tanisha stumbled, her white dress twisting around her legs. "I didn't do anything," she screamed, finally finding her voice. "It was him. It was Kyle." She pointed a shaking finger at her husband, who was currently being handcuffed on the floor. "He made me do it!" Tanisha wailed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "He told me it was legal. He said it was just a loophole. I didn't want to sign the papers. He forced me. I am just a mother. I was scared of him." Kyle, hearing this betrayal, twisted his head around his face, purple with rage. "You lying witch!" Kyle shouted from the floor, spitting onto the rug. "You begged me for the money. You said you needed a new car. You said you wouldn't drive the kids to school unless you had a Tahoe. It was your idea to use Marcus's social security number because you said he owed you for birthing him." The room gasped. My cousins looked at Tanisha with horror. The truth was spilling out ugly and undeniable. "You are a liar!" Tanisha shrieked, struggling against the agent's grip. "I wanted to get a job. He wouldn't let me. He is the one moving the crypto. He is the one talking to the gangs. I am a victim here." "Both of you are under arrest," the agent interrupted, tightening the cuffs on Tanisha's wrists. "You can debate who is more guilty in front of a federal judge. But we have your signatures on the loan applications. We have the IP addresses from your devices. And we have the audio of you conspiring to defraud your sister tonight." Tanisha turned to me, her eyes wild. "Zora, please, I am your sister. You can't let them take me to prison." "The baby. Think of the baby. I will have him in a cell." I looked at her. I looked at the sister I had tried to help for 20 years. The sister who had pushed me down, stolen from me, and used her children as riot shields. "The baby will be better off in the system than with you, Tanisha," I said softly. "At least the state won't sell his credit score before he is born." "You are evil," Tanisha screamed, lunging toward me, but the agent held her back easily. "I hate you. I hope you die alone." As they dragged Tanisha toward the door, Mama Hattie finally moved. She had been sitting on the sofa watching her golden child crumble, her face pale. She stood up, her cane shaking in her hand. "Wait! Mama!" Hattie cried out, her voice thin and reedy. "You can't take her. She is a good mother. It is a mistake. Officer, here, take my purse. I can pay the bail." "How much is it? I have a credit card." The agent stopped and looked at Mama Hattie. He looked at the purse she was holding. "Ma'am," the agent said, his voice dropping an octave, "we know about the card ending in 4098. The one Zora Williams reported stolen. The one you used to buy a PlayStation." Mama Hattie froze. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. "We are not arresting you tonight, Mrs. Williams," the agent said. "But I suggest you get a lawyer. Because aiding and abetting identity fraud is also a felony. If we find out you knew about the children's accounts, we will be coming back for you." The color drained from Mama Hattie's face completely. She looked at me, realizing for the first time that her immunity was gone. She realized that by protecting Tanisha, she had exposed herself. "Oh, Lord," she whispered. Then, with a theatrical groan that I had seen 1,000 times, she rolled her eyes back and slumped onto the sofa. "Mama!" one of the cousins yelled, rushing to her. "She is fainting. Call an ambulance." I didn't move. I watched her eyelids flutter. I saw the way she braced herself as she fell so she wouldn't hit the coffee table. "She is fine," I said coldly. "She is not having a heart attack. She is having a reality check." The agents didn't wait for her to wake up. They hauled Kyle and Tanisha out the front door. I followed them onto the porch. The scene outside was chaotic. Blue and red lights washed over the neighborhood, illuminating the shocked faces of the neighbors who had gathered on their lawns. Mrs. Jenkins from down the street was filming with her phone. The illusion of the perfect, pious family that Mama Hattie had tried so hard to maintain was shattered for all the world to see. Kyle was shoved into the back of one cruiser, still shouting about his rights. Tanisha was led to another. She was sobbing loudly now, a wailing sound that echoed through the night air. "Zora," she screamed as they pushed her head down to clear the doorframe. "You did this. You ruined my life. You are jealous because nobody loves you. You will rot in hell for this." I stood on the top step, my arms crossed, watching her. "I didn't ruin your life, Tanisha," I said, though she couldn't hear me over the siren. "I just stopped you from ruining 5 others." The car doors slammed shut. The engines revved. I watched as the red taillights faded down the street, taking the toxicity that had poisoned my family for decades away with them. I turned back to the house. Inside, my cousins were fanning Mama Hattie, who was miraculously starting to recover now that the police were gone. Aunt Eunice was standing by the fireplace, sipping her tea, looking satisfied. But my eyes went to the staircase. Sitting on the top step looking through the banister were Marcus and Jaden. They had woken up. They had seen everything. I walked up the stairs, my heart breaking. I sat down next to Marcus. He didn't cry. He looked at the empty driveway where his parents had just been taken away. "Are they coming back?" he asked quietly. "Not for a long time, baby," I said. Marcus looked at me. He looked at the chaos downstairs, then he leaned his head on my shoulder. "Good," he whispered. And in that single word I knew I had made the right choice. The war was over. The rebuilding could finally begin. The seasons in Georgia have a way of marking time not just by the temperature, but by what is blooming. 1 year ago, the air was thick with the smoke of my burning rose trellis and the suffocating humidity of my family's betrayal. Today, the air is crisp, carrying the scent of fresh mulch and blooming jasmine. I stood on the back patio, the same spot where I had once watched my sister Tanisha try to destroy me, and I looked out at a yard that had been completely transformed. The blackened scorch marks on the pavers were gone, scrubbed away by power washers and time. The trellis had been rebuilt stronger this time, made of wrought iron instead of wood. And climbing up its spine were the new Juliet roses I had planted. They were not just surviving, they were thriving, their petals unfolding in vibrant shades of peach and cream, defiant against the memory of the fire. It has been exactly 12 months since the federal agents led Tanisha and Kyle out of my house in handcuffs. 12 months since the silence fell and the real work began. The road from that night to this morning has not been easy. It was paved with court dates, therapy sessions, dental surgeries, and nights where I sat on the floor holding a screaming child who was terrified that the dark meant abandonment. But as I watched the scene in the garden below me, I knew that every single second of the struggle was worth it. The legal battle was swift and brutal. The evidence I had gathered, combined with the files Mr. Vance unearthed and the testimony of Aunt Eunice, was insurmountable. The federal prosecutor did not offer a plea deal. He called Tanisha and Kyle predators, of the worst kind, people who devoured their own young. I sat in the front row of the courtroom every single day. I watched Tanisha try to play the victim, sobbing about postpartum depression and coercion. I watched Kyle try to act the part of the misunderstood entrepreneur. But the judge, a stern woman who had seen too much evil in her career, was not moved. When she read the sentence, her voice did not waver. 10 years in federal prison for each of them. No possibility of parole for at least 8. The judge looked at them and said that their crime was not just stealing money, but stealing the very identity and future of the children they were sworn to protect. I remember the look on Tanisha's face when the gavel banged. It was not remorse. It was shock. She looked at me, mouthing the word help, as if I would suddenly jump up and write a check to fix a federal sentence. I simply looked back at her and shook my head. The bank was closed. Tanisha gave birth to her 5th child in the prison hospital wing 2 months after her arrest. It was a boy. She named him King, a final attempt to manifest the royalty she thought she deserved. But she never got to hold him for more than an hour. The state took custody immediately. Because of the severity of the charges, specifically the chemical endangerment of the other children, her parental rights were terminated on the spot. I was there waiting. I took that baby boy, wrapped him in a soft blue blanket I had bought with my own money, and I renamed him Micah. He was not a gold mine. He was not a credit line. He was a baby. And for the first time in his family's history, he was going to be raised without a price tag on his head. The fallout destroyed Mama Hattie completely. She spent every dime she had on Tanisha's legal defense, hiring shady lawyers who promised miracles they couldn't deliver. She mortgaged her house, sold her jewelry, and drained her pension. When the guilty verdict came down, the creditors came for her. She lost the house she had lived in for 40 years. The shame was too much for her pride to handle. She tried to move in with me, showing up on my doorstep with a suitcase and a Bible, claiming that God wanted us to reconcile. But I had drawn a line in the sand that could not be crossed. I told her that she could visit the children on Sundays under supervision, but she could not live in the sanctuary I was building for them. Now, Mama Hattie lives in a state-subsidized nursing home on the other side of town. It is a gray, cheerless place that smells of antiseptic and regret. I pay for her medication, and I ensure she has clean clothes, because that is my duty as a daughter, but I do not give her the attention she craves. She spends her days telling the nurses that her daughter is a cruel, ungrateful wretch who stole her grandchildren. She sits alone in the common room clutching old photos of Tanisha living in a past that never really existed. It is a lonely ending, but it is the one she chose every time she put Tanisha's greed above the safety of those kids. I took a sip of my coffee and walked down the stone steps into the garden. The sound of laughter drifted through the air. It was a sound that used to be rare in this house, but now it was the soundtrack of my life. Marcus was sitting on a picnic blanket under the old oak tree. At 9 years old, he looked like a different child. The hollow cheeks were gone, filled out by a year of proper nutrition. The fear that used to live permanently in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet curiosity. He was holding a thick hardcover book, his finger tracing the lines as he read aloud. All children except one grow up. Marcus read, his voice clear and confident. Sitting around him were Jaden, Aaliyah, and little Micah, who was now a chubby, happy 10-month-old, sitting in the grass, clapping his hands. Jaden, who used to wet the bed every night from the trauma of sedation, was lying on his stomach listening intently. His teeth, which had been black with rot, were now capped and clean, his smile bright. Aaliyah was braiding the hair of a doll. I had bought her a doll she didn't have to share or hide. I listened to Marcus read. A year ago, he could barely decipher a cereal box. The school system had failed him and his parents had erased him. But we had worked hard. We hired tutors. We spent hours at the kitchen table sounding out vowels. We celebrated every chapter finished with a sticker on the fridge. And today, he was reading Peter Pan to his siblings. He was literate. He was present. He was free. He looked up and saw me approaching. He didn't flinch. He didn't look scared. He smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached his eyes. "Auntie Zora," he said, "did you know Peter Pan can fly?" I sat down on the blanket next to them, pulling Micah into my lap. The baby smelled of milk and sunshine. I did know that, I said, kissing the top of Micah's head. "But do you know why he can fly?" Marcus thought about it. "Because he has fairy dust. Because he believes he can," I said. "And because he has happy thoughts." I looked at the four of them. 5, including the baby in my arms. The court had finalized the adoption papers last week. They were no longer Davis' children. They were William's children. They were my children. It was a terrifying responsibility, one I had never planned for, but one I accepted with every fiber of my being. I looked over at the guest house. It was no longer a squalid den of thieves. I had renovated it, turning it into a playroom and a study area. The walls were painted bright yellow. The windows were open to let in the light. It was a place of learning and joy, the ghosts of Kyle and Tanisha exorcised by the laughter of the children they had abandoned. Aunt Eunice walked out of the back door carrying a tray of lemonade. She moved a little slower these days, but her spirit was as sharp as ever. She had moved in with me to help raise the kids, becoming the grandmother figure Mama Hattie refused to be. She set the tray down and sat on the bench watching the children with a look of profound satisfaction. "They look good, Zora," she said softly. "They do." I agreed. "You know," Eunice said, watching Marcus turn the page. "Hattie called me yesterday. She said she misses them. She asked if she could come over for Easter." I looked at Marcus, who was laughing at something Jaden said. I remembered the sedatives. I remembered the credit cards. I remembered the way Mama Hattie had watched Tanisha abuse them and called it love. "No," I said firmly. "We will send her a card. We will send her a picture. But she cannot come here. We worked too hard to get the poison out of the soil, Auntie. We cannot let it seep back in." Eunice nodded, tapping her hand on her knee. "You are right. You have to protect the garden." I looked at the rose bush again. I reached out and touched a bloom. It was soft, but the stem was covered in thorns. It had to be tough to survive. I realized then that I was like this garden. I had been burned, trampled, and used, but I had cut back the dead branches. I had dug up the rot. I had watered the roots with truth and boundaries. People say that blood is thicker than water. They say family is everything. But they are wrong. Blood is just biology. It is an accident of birth. Family is not about whose DNA you share. It is about who shows up when the house is on fire. It is about who feeds you when you are hungry. It is about who protects you when you are sleeping. Tanisha and Kyle shared blood with these children, but they were never their family. They were their captors. I was the one who broke the lock. Marcus finished the chapter and closed the book. He looked at me, his eyes shining with pride. I finished it. Auntie Zora, can we go to the library tomorrow and get the next one? We can go anywhere you want, Marcus, I said, pulling him into a side hug. The world is yours now. He leaned into me safe and secure. Jaden and Aaliyah scrambled over to get in on the hug, a pile of giggling limbs and unconditional love. I held them all, feeling the weight of their futures in my arms. It was heavy, but it was a good weight. I thought about Tanisha sitting in her cell, blaming the world for her fate. I thought about Mama Hattie in her lonely room. And then I looked at the sun filtering through the leaves of the oak tree, illuminating the faces of the children I had saved. I had cut out the cancer to save the patient. It was a painful surgery. It left scars. But as I sat there in the garden, surrounded by life and love and second chances, I knew the patient was going to survive. In fact, we were going to do more than survive. We were going to bloom. This is Zora Williams signing off. If my story touched you, please like and subscribe. And remember, you have the right to curate your life. You have the right to close the gate on toxicity, no matter who it comes from. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say goodbye. This journey taught me that family is a verb, not just a biological coincidence. For too long, I watered a dead garden hoping my loyalty would change toxic people. But I learned that you cannot save those who feed on your destruction. True love requires boundaries, not blind submission. By cutting off the parasites, I didn't destroy my family. I saved the innocent lives that actually mattered. My worth isn't defined by how much I give, but by who I protect. Sometimes you have to be the villain in their story to be the hero in your own. If this story gave you the courage to set boundaries, please hit the like button and subscribe for more truth. Have you ever had to cut off a family member to save yourself? Let me know in the comments below.